What if one of the greatest revolutions in human history didn't begin with kings, wars, or empires, but with a handful of seeds? Thousands of years ago, the world's first farmers transformed wild landscapes into thriving civilizations, forever changing how humanity lived, worked, and shaped the earth. But how did this incredible journey begin, and what hidden costs came with it? Stay with us as we uncover the remarkable story of the first farmers who changed our world forever. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another fascinating journey into history. The valley looks ordinary at first glance. A ribbon of water winds between low hills, wild grasses bend beneath a cool spring breeze, and scattered stands of oak and pistachio cast moving shadows across the earth. Small bands of people drift quietly through this landscape, carrying woven baskets, stone blades, and generations of memory about where seeds ripen first, where gazelles gather after rain, and where dangerous winters can still surprise the unwary. Nothing here resembles a city, a kingdom, or an empire. Yet beneath these unassuming hills lies one of the greatest turning points in the entire history of life on Earth. Somewhere among valleys like this, long before writing, before bronze, before pyramids or kings, humanity begins making choices that will eventually transform forests into fields, rivers into irrigation canals, and nearly every corner of the planet into a human landscape. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. The remarkable part is that no one alive during this age realizes what is happening. There is no sense that history is changing direction forever. No leader gathers people to announce a revolution. No ancient observer records the first farmer's name. Instead, change arrives almost invisibly hidden inside thousands of ordinary decisions repeated across many generations. A handful of seeds dropped beside a campsite. A favorite patch of wild grain harvested a little more carefully each year. A family returning season after season to the same fertile valley because they already know exactly what grows there. History rarely announces itself while it is being made. Only a few thousand years earlier, the world itself has looked dramatically different. Vast ice sheets still cover enormous stretches of the northern hemisphere. Sea levels stand far lower than they do today. Great plains connect lands that will later become islands, while coastlines lie dozens of kilometers farther from the modern shore. Winds carry cold dust across continents, and enormous mammals still roam regions where cities will one day stand. Mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, giant deer, and other Ice Age creatures dominate landscapes that modern humans share with them. Then the climate begins to shift. The end of the last Ice Age unfolds gradually rather than overnight, although some periods of warming happen surprisingly quickly in geological terms. Temperatures climb. Glaciers retreat into distant mountains, rivers swell with meltwater, forests spread into places that have long remained open grasslands. Wetlands appear where dry valleys once existed. Animals alter their migration routes. Plants expand into new environments while others disappear from regions they once dominated. For people who depend entirely upon hunting and gathering, every environmental change matters. Their lives are tied directly to seasonal rhythms. They know which berries ripen after certain rains, where edible roots survive dry summers, and when migrating herds cross familiar valleys. As climates continue changing, this ancient knowledge must also change. What survives in the archaeological record suggests remarkable adaptability. Human communities do not simply endure these transformations. They learn from them. They watch carefully. They experiment constantly, even if they never think of their actions as experiments. Across Southwest Asia, especially within the region, archaeologists now call the Fertile Crescent, wild ancestors of wheat and barley thrive naturally across rolling hills and open woodlands. During favourable years, these grasses produce astonishing quantities of nutritious seeds. Entire hillsides shimmer gold beneath the summer sun, offering harvests that reward patience more than pursuit. Unlike large game animals that may vanish unexpectedly wild, cereals return year after year if environmental conditions remain favourable. People become exceptionally skilled at gathering these grains. Flint blades fitted into wooden handles slice through ripe stalks with impressive efficiency. Grinding stones reduce hard kernels into coarse flour. Hearths bake simple breads that provide reliable nourishment. Storage pits protect precious food from moisture and animals for weeks or even months. At first, nothing about this process qualifies as farming. These communities still gather what nature produces without deliberately planting fields. Yet an important relationship is beginning to develop. Instead of merely passing through landscapes, people start investing knowledge in particular places. Certain valleys become familiar beyond simple memory. Families remember where the richest stands grow, which slopes ripen first, and which streams continue flowing during dry seasons. This growing familiarity subtly changes human behaviour. Rather than wandering endlessly across enormous territories, some groups begin returning repeatedly to especially productive locations. Seasonal camps become increasingly substantial. Stone foundations replace temporary shelters in a few places. Storage facilities become larger because people expect to revisit them. Cemeteries appear nearby, quietly tying the living to specific landscapes through generations of ancestors. These developments unfold over centuries rather than decades. There is no sudden abandonment of hunting or gathering. Gazelles remain important prey. Wild fruits, nuts, legumes, fish, birds, and edible roots continue filling daily meals. Diversity remains the safest strategy because nature itself remains unpredictable. Then another climatic surprise interrupts the story. Around 12,900 years ago, much of the Northern Hemisphere experiences an abrupt return to colder conditions during an interval known today as the Younger Dryas. Temperatures fall again. Growing seasons shorten across many regions. Rainfall patterns shift. Environments that have slowly become warmer suddenly demand fresh adaptation. Scholars still debate exactly how strongly this event influences the origins of agriculture. The evidence remains incomplete, and no single explanation fully accounts for humanity's transition toward farming. Some researchers argue that increasing environmental stress encourages people to manage wild plants more deliberately, as reliable food sources become harder to predict. Others believe cultivation has already begun before the colder climate arrives and simply continues afterward. Both interpretations draw support from archaeological discoveries, reminding us that ancient history rarely offers simple answers. Whatever the precise sequence, people respond creatively rather than passively. Imagine returning to a favourite patch of wild wheat every season. If too many stalks are cut carelessly, future harvests decline. If ripe seeds scatter naturally onto disturbed soil near campsites, fresh plants sometimes appear the following year in surprisingly convenient locations. Observant communities cannot fail to notice such patterns. Over countless generations, practical experience accumulates without written instructions or scientific theory. Perhaps someone clears competing weeds around particularly healthy grasses. Perhaps discarded seed accidentally germinates beside seasonal shelters. Perhaps children play with gathered grains near damp ground where new shoots later emerge. No single action creates agriculture, but together these repeated observations slowly reshape the relationship between humans and plants. The change remains almost invisible from one lifetime to the next. Parents teach children where to gather food, yet each generation modifies small details learned from experience. Better harvesting methods preserve future growth. More careful storage protects valuable seeds. Familiar camps become places worth maintaining instead of abandoning. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, the boundary separating gathering from cultivation begins to blur. Looking backward across thousands of years, modern observers often imagine that farming appears as a revolutionary invention, like the creation of the wheel or the discovery of metalworking. The archaeological record tells a quieter story. Agriculture emerges not from a single brilliant breakthrough, but from patience measured across centuries. It grows from careful observation, repeated habit, environmental opportunity, and countless forgotten individuals whose names vanish long before history begins recording human lives. Standing in that quiet valley once more, the landscape still appears unchanged. Birds cross the morning sky, wild grasses ripple beneath the wind, children collect seeds while older hunters scan distant hills for game. Nothing suggests that these ordinary moments will eventually shape every civilization yet to come, and yet beneath every careful handful of grain lies the beginning of a transformation that will outlast empires, redraw continents, and forever alter the destiny of both humanity and the earth itself. The first cultivated fields do not appear all at once as neat rectangles stretching toward the horizon. There are no fences marking private property, no villages devoted entirely to farming, and no certainty that planted grain will survive until harvest. Instead, the landscape itself becomes a quiet partner in an unfolding experiment. Valleys, foothills, river terraces, and seasonal wetlands each offer different opportunities, and the people who live among them slowly discover that the earth responds to careful attention in ways that wild nature alone never could. Across what is now modern-day Iraq, Syria, southeastern Turkey, western Iran, Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, and Palestine, the region later called the Fertile Crescent contains an extraordinary variety of environments packed into relatively short distances. Snow-fed mountains release streams that nourish broad valleys below. Open grasslands support grazing animals. Woodland edges provide nuts, fruits, timber, and game. Seasonal rainfall arrives reliably enough in many places to encourage dense stands of wild cereals without the need for irrigation. This combination of geography proves unusually generous. It does not guarantee the birth of agriculture, but it creates conditions where human observation can accumulate over many generations. Communities return repeatedly to landscapes that continue rewarding their knowledge. Archaeological sites scattered across this region reveal just how gradual the transformation truly is. Long before fully domesticated crops become common villages, begin leaving behind traces of increasingly permanent life. Circular houses built from stone and mud replace simple shelters meant to last only a season. Floors are repaired rather than abandoned. Hearths occupy the same locations year after year. Refuse accumulates into deep archaeological layers that silently record centuries of continuous occupation. One of the most striking examples comes from settlements belonging to what archaeologists call the Natufian culture, flourishing roughly 15,000 to 11,500 years ago. These communities remain hunters and gatherers, yet they begin displaying behaviors once thought possible only after farming had already emerged. They construct durable dwellings, they establish cemeteries, they invest enormous effort in grinding stones for processing grain. Some settlements appear occupied for much of the year rather than serving as temporary camps. The evidence suggests that abundance rather than scarcity alone can encourage people to settle. Rich environments make staying worthwhile. Daily life changes in subtle but important ways. Instead of carrying every possession from one campsite to another, families accumulate heavier tools that would be impractical for highly mobile groups. Massive grinding stones weighing many kilograms remain inside houses. Storage pits lined with stone protect food from rodents and moisture. Mortars carved into bedrock remain fixed in place for generations of use. These objects represent something larger than technological improvement. They reflect confidence that people will return tomorrow, next season, and next year. As settlements become more permanent, familiarity with nearby plants grows even deeper. The people living here are no longer passing visitors. They observe every stage of a plant's life cycle. They know precisely when shoots first emerge after winter rains, how different slopes mature at different times, and which patches consistently produce the largest seed heads. This intimacy with the landscape slowly encourages intervention. Modern genetic studies reveal that domesticated wheat differs from its wild ancestors in surprisingly specific ways. One of the most important changes involves the plant's seed head known as the reshaped. Wild wheat naturally shatters when ripe, scattering seeds across the ground to reproduce successfully. Domesticated wheat retains its seeds on the stalk, making harvesting far easier for humans, but making survival in the wild much more difficult. At first glance, such a transformation seems unlikely to occur naturally. Yet evolution requires no conscious plan. If harvesters repeatedly gather stalks that hold together longest, because those are easiest to collect, they unintentionally select for plants carrying exactly this trait. The seeds they later scatter or plant come disproportionately from individuals already better suited to human harvesting. Generation after generation, the balance shifts almost invisibly. No farmer understands genetics. No one recognizes evolution by natural selection. Even so, human behavior begins directing plant evolution. Barley undergoes similar changes. Lentils, peas, chickpeas, flax, and other useful species gradually join the growing collection of cultivated plants. Each follows its own timeline. Some domesticate relatively quickly, while others require centuries or even millennia before fully depending upon human care. Scholars continue debating the exact pace of these developments, because the archaeological evidence captures only scattered moments within an immensely long process. Charred seeds preserved by ancient fires, microscopic plant remains trapped in sediments, and chemical signatures buried in soils each provide fragments of a much larger story. No single discovery identifies the exact year when gathering becomes farming. Instead, agriculture exists for a long time as a spectrum. Some communities still depend primarily on hunting while experimenting with small, cultivated plots. Others combine managed cereals with intensive gathering of wild foods. Certain settlements appear to abandon cultivation during unfavorable periods before returning to it later. Progress is neither straight nor inevitable. Climate continues exerting powerful influence throughout this transition. Rainfall fluctuates from year to year. Warm seasons arrive early or late. Rivers shift course. A single failed harvest can threaten survival if people rely too heavily upon cultivated plants before farming methods become reliable. This uncertainty explains why hunting never disappears overnight. Gazelles continue supplying valuable meat. Wild cattle roam open country. Birds fish shellfish fruits. Figs, almonds, pistachios, and edible greens remain essential parts of the diet. Farming supplements older ways of life long before replacing them. Yet every successful harvest quietly strengthens the appeal of cultivation. Stored grain possesses remarkable advantages. Unlike fresh meat, it keeps for months when protected from moisture and pests. It can be carried during travel, exchanged between neighboring communities, or reserved against difficult winters. It creates possibilities that hunting alone rarely provides. Storage itself becomes increasingly sophisticated. Clay-lined pits, woven baskets sealed with mud, and carefully constructed granaries begin protecting valuable food reserves. These innovations reduce waste while encouraging even larger harvests the following season. With greater stores come new responsibilities. Someone must monitor supplies. Someone must decide when food is distributed. Someone repairs storage buildings before rain damages precious grain. These tasks introduce subtle forms of organization that become increasingly important as settlements grow larger. Meanwhile, another quiet transformation unfolds inside human minds. Generations of highly mobile hunter-gatherers think about territory differently from people returning repeatedly to cultivated plots. A planted field represents labor invested months before harvest. Protecting that investment naturally becomes important. Although firm concepts of land ownership remain far in the future, people begin developing stronger attachments to particular places because their future food literally grows there. The relationship between time also changes. Hunters often respond immediately to opportunities presented by nature. Farmers must constantly think ahead. Seeds saved today determine harvests many months later. Fields prepared before seasonal rains shape food supplies the following year. Patience becomes a survival skill. Children grow up learning calendars written not on paper, but across the landscape itself. Blossoming trees announce approaching seasons. Returning birds signal changing weather. The appearance of certain stars before dawn helps anticipate annual cycles. Human memory increasingly synchronizes with the rhythms of cultivated plants. What makes this transformation especially remarkable is its decentralized nature. There is no headquarters directing agricultural innovation. No ruler commands villages to plant crops. Countless communities experiment independently, sharing ideas through travel, trade, marriage, and observation. Knowledge spreads gradually across networks that leave almost no written trace, because writing itself has not yet been invented. The first farmers never know they're becoming the first farmers. They simply notice that some seeds grow better than others. They remember which fields produce abundant harvests. They pass practical experience from grandparents to grandchildren. Small improvements accumulate almost invisibly, until centuries later the landscape itself bears unmistakable signs of human intention. Looking across these early settlements from a nearby hillside, the differences remain subtle. Houses cluster more closely together than before. Smoke rises from familiar hearths. Grain dries beneath the sun outside stone dwellings. Children carry baskets filled with harvested cereals instead of only gathered wild plants. Hunters still disappear into distant valleys at dawn, yet more people remain behind, tending places that now promise tomorrow's food as much as today's. Without realizing it, these communities are crossing a threshold that humanity will never fully reverse. The earth beneath their feet is no longer merely a landscape to be visited. It is slowly becoming a world to be shaped. The villages do not become permanent because someone decides that wandering should end. They remain because leaving grows increasingly difficult. Every season adds another layer of work that cannot easily be carried away. Walls repaired after winter storms, storage pits carefully sealed against dampness, grinding stones worn smooth by countless hands, and fields that promise food months into the future, all create invisible threads tying people to one place. Little by little, movement changes from a constant rhythm of life into an occasional necessity. Across the Fertile Crescent, settlements that once held only a few families begin expanding into communities of dozens and eventually hundreds of people. From above they appear modest by modern standards, clusters of mud brick houses blending almost seamlessly into the surrounding earth. Yet beneath those roofs, daily life is becoming more interconnected than ever before. One of the most remarkable archaeological sites from this period is Jericho, located near a reliable spring in the Jordan Valley. Human occupation stretches back thousands of years, making it one of the oldest continuously inhabited places on Earth. Long before kingdoms or written laws emerge, generations return again and again to this oasis drawn by dependable water in an increasingly settled world. Jericho surprises archaeologists not simply because of its age, but because of what its inhabitants build. Massive stone walls and an imposing tower appear during the pre-pottery Neolithic period. Scholars still debate their exact purpose. Some suggest they protect against flooding, others believe they provide defense, while still others see them as symbols of communal identity and organization. The evidence remains incomplete, and no single explanation fully accounts for these extraordinary structures. Whatever their purpose, one conclusion is difficult to avoid. Projects of such scale require cooperation extending far beyond individual households. Communities are no longer merely collections of families sharing a landscape. They are becoming societies capable of planning, organizing labor, and investing enormous effort into futures that extend beyond a single season. Elsewhere, another settlement quietly reveals an equally profound transformation. At Abu Huraira, situated along the Euphrates River, archaeologists uncover evidence spanning both hunter-gatherer life and early farming. Few sites preserve the transition so clearly. Ancient seeds, animal bones, pollen, and microscopic plant remains allow researchers to reconstruct changing diets over centuries. The story they reveal is not one of immediate improvement. Early farming often demands more physical labor than hunting and gathering. Fields require clearing. Soil must be prepared. Crops need protection from animals. Harvesting occupies long days beneath intense sunlight. Grain then has to be dried, stored, cleaned, and ground into flour before it becomes edible. The work rarely ends. Human skeletons recovered from early farming communities frequently display signs of repetitive strain. Knees, backs, shoulders, and wrists bear the marks of years spent grinding grain or working fields. Teeth become heavily worn, partly because tiny particles of stone from grinding tools mix with flour. Cavities also become more common as diets shift toward carbohydrate-rich cereals. In many respects, the first farmers appear less healthy than some of their hunter-gatherer ancestors. Average height declines in numerous early agricultural populations. Childhood stress becomes more evident in developing bones. Infectious diseases increase as larger communities live closer together. This presents one of the great paradoxes of human history. Why would people embrace farming if life often becomes physically harder? The answer is unlikely to rest upon a single cause. Farming offers advantages that become increasingly important despite its costs. Stored food provides insurance against certain seasonal shortages. Permanent settlements allow larger populations to survive within relatively small territories. Families can raise more children when they no longer carry infants across long migrations. Even if each individual experiences greater hardship, communities as a whole often grow larger and more resilient. Population itself begins changing the equation. As villages expand, nearby wild resources gradually become less abundant. Hunting grounds experience greater pressure. Easily gathered plants around settlements diminish. Larger populations require more predictable food supplies than nature alone can consistently provide. Agriculture becomes not merely an opportunity but an increasingly practical necessity. Within these villages, homes themselves reflect changing priorities. Early circular buildings gradually give way in many regions to rectangular structures. At first, this architectural shift may seem minor, but rectangular houses make more efficient use of space. They share walls, conserve building materials, and allow settlements to expand in organized patterns. Rooms acquire specialized purposes. One stores grain, another houses sleeping platforms. Separate spaces accommodate food preparation, tool-making, or craft activities. Domestic life grows increasingly structured. The dead also remain closer to the living. In several Neolithic settlements, burials take place beneath house floors. Generations literally live above their ancestors. Excavations reveal skeletons carefully interred beneath rooms where daily life continues uninterrupted. In some remarkable cases, skulls are later removed, modelled with plaster to recreate facial features and preserved within the community. Exactly why this practice develops remains uncertain. Some archaeologists interpret it as ancestor veneration. Others emphasize family identity or household continuity. What survives in the record suggests that connections between people and place deepen dramatically during this period. A house is no longer simply shelter. It becomes memory made visible. Outside, the village's cultivated fields gradually expand into surrounding landscapes. The first farmers learn through experience which soils retain moisture longest, which slopes drain too quickly, and which lowlands risk seasonal flooding. Every harvest teaches lessons that no written manual could yet record. Knowledge spreads through observation. Children accompany adults into fields from an early age, learning to recognize subtle differences between healthy and failing crops. They memorize planting seasons by watching the sky, the behavior of animals, and the flowering of familiar trees. Education exists entirely through lived experience repeated year after year. Specialization slowly emerges alongside this accumulated knowledge. Not everyone spends everyday farming. Some individuals become particularly skilled at shaping stone blades. Others weave baskets capable of protecting grain from moisture. Some excel at constructing houses or producing finely polished axes used for clearing woodland. These occupations remain closely connected to agriculture because farming creates the stability needed for specialized work. Reliable food allows certain members of society to devote more time to particular crafts. Trade quietly expands as well. Communities exchange materials unavailable in their immediate surroundings. Obsidian from volcanic regions travels hundreds of kilometers because its razor-sharp edges make exceptional cutting tools. Marine shells appear far inland, suggesting extensive exchange networks linking distant settlements. Decorative stones, pigments, and carefully crafted ornaments move alongside practical goods. These exchanges carry more than objects. Ideas travel with them. A visitor arriving from another valley may introduce unfamiliar planting techniques, improved harvesting tools, or knowledge of crops suited to slightly different climates. Innovation spreads gradually through human relationships rather than centralized instruction. Even so, every village adapts farming to its own environment. There is no universal formula. Rainfall differs from one valley to the next. Soil composition changes over surprisingly short distances. Local plants behave differently depending on altitude and temperature. Successful communities observe these differences, carefully adjusting methods through generations of patient experience. The landscape itself becomes an active teacher. Every failed harvest leaves a lesson. Every unusually abundant season encourages repetition of successful practices. Farmers begin understanding patterns, too subtle for outsiders to notice. They recognize tiny variations in soil color, moisture, and vegetation that reveal where crops will flourish best. Their expertise grows quietly accumulated through countless ordinary days rather than dramatic discoveries. Standing at the edge of one of these villages at sunset, little appears extraordinary. Smoke rises gently from flat-roofed homes. Grain rests inside carefully sealed storage rooms. Children chase one another through narrow paths between houses, while older generations prepare the evening meal. Beyond the settlement, cultivated fields merge almost imperceptibly with wild grasslands stretching toward distant hills. Yet hidden within these peaceful scenes lies a profound transformation. Humanity is no longer simply adapting to nature's rhythms. It is beginning, however cautiously, to reshape those rhythms in return. Villages that never wander are becoming the foundation upon which every future town, city, kingdom, and civilization will eventually stand. The first domesticated animals do not arrive as obedient companions waiting to serve human needs. They remain wild creatures shaped by millions of years of evolution, alert to danger, fiercely independent, and perfectly adapted to lives beyond human control. The remarkable transformation that follows is not simply a story of people changing animals. It is equally a story of animals changing people. Over thousands of years, both species begin altering one another in ways neither could have imagined, creating partnerships that permanently reshape the history of the planet. Among the earliest candidates for domestication are goats. Their natural behavior makes them unusually suited to life alongside humans. Wild goats already live in social groups with established hierarchies. They browse a wide variety of plants, navigate steep hillsides with remarkable agility, and reproduce relatively quickly compared with larger animals. For communities settling near rugged mountain landscapes, they offer a dependable source of meat, hides, bones, and eventually milk. Archaeological evidence from sites in the Zagros Mountains, particularly in what is now western Iran, suggests that people begin managing goat populations more than 10,000 years ago. The clues are surprisingly subtle. Researchers study the ages at which animals are slaughtered, the proportions of males to females, and gradual changes in bone structure over many generations. In wild herds, deaths occur across all age groups according to natural circumstances. Managed herds reveal different patterns. Young males are often killed earlier because fewer are needed for breeding, while females survive longer to produce offspring year after year. Such demographic signatures quietly reveal deliberate human management long before obvious physical changes appear. The goats themselves begin evolving. Individuals that tolerate human presence slightly better are more likely to survive and reproduce. Those that panic easily or prove dangerously aggressive may be removed from breeding populations. Generation after generation, natural selection operates within a new environment created by human choices. No one intends to redesign an entire species. The transformation emerges gradually through ordinary decisions repeated countless times. Sheep follow a similar path. Their thick wool, however, is not initially the primary attraction many modern observers imagine. Early sheep are valued first for meat, skins, and bone. The dense woolly fleece associated with later domesticated breeds develops gradually through selective breeding over thousands of years. In the earliest farming communities, sheep provide reliable food long before they become walking sources of textile fiber. Pigs present a different challenge. Unlike goats or sheep, pigs are intelligent, adaptable, and capable of thriving on a wide variety of foods. They reproduce rapidly and grow quickly, making them valuable sources of meat. Yet they are also more difficult to control, especially adult males. Their domestication appears to occur independently in multiple regions, reflecting the flexibility of both humans and pigs in adapting to one another. Cattle represent perhaps the greatest undertaking of all. The ancestors of domestic cattle are the aurochs, enormous wild bovines that once roam across Europe, Asia, and North Africa. Standing far taller than modern cattle and armed with formidable horns, an adult aurochs is more than capable of killing a human. Ancient rock art and historical descriptions portray them as powerful, dangerous animals commanding deep respect. Transforming such creatures into manageable livestock is neither simple nor quick. Scholars continue debating whether cattle are domesticated in one primary region before spreading outward or through several independent processes. Genetic evidence has clarified parts of the story while raising new questions. What survives in the record suggests multiple episodes of interaction between wild and managed populations. The result, however, is unmistakable. Eventually, cattle become indispensable. They provide meat, milk, hides, bone, horn manure for fertilizing fields, and later the muscle power needed for pulling plows and transporting heavy loads. Few animals influence the development of civilization more profoundly. Domestication extends beyond food production. Dogs have already accompanied humans for thousands of years before agriculture begins, likely descending from wolves that gradually adapt to life alongside people during the late Pleistocene. Their partnership demonstrates that humans and animals are capable of building relationships extending beyond simple exploitation. Dogs guard settlements. They assist in hunting. They warn of approaching predators or strangers. They consume waste that might otherwise attract scavengers. Their presence blurs the line between practical necessity and companionship in ways still familiar today. As villages become permanent, these animal partnerships grow increasingly important. A settlement surrounded by managed herds presents a very different soundscape from one occupied only by hunters and gatherers. Dawn begins with the bleating of goats, the calls of sheep, barking dogs, and the steady movement of animals toward nearby grazing areas. Children grow up recognizing individual animals rather than merely encountering wild creatures during occasional hunts. The rhythm of daily life changes. Someone must lead herds to pasture. Someone must protect them from wolves, leopards, bears, or human thieves. Someone must care for newborn animals during difficult seasons. Someone must decide which individuals are kept for breeding and which become food. These responsibilities tie human schedules even more closely to the cycles of nature. Spring becomes a season of births. Summer demands careful grazing. Autumn brings preparation for winter. Every year unfolds according to patterns shared by both humans and livestock. Animals also transform agriculture itself. Goats and sheep convert plants growing on rocky hillsides into food that humans cannot digest directly. They expand the productive capacity of landscapes unsuitable for crop cultivation. Rather than competing entirely with agriculture, herding and farming increasingly complement one another. Fields produce grain. Pastures support livestock. Together they create more stable food systems than either strategy alone. Another remarkable development gradually emerges from these relationships: milk. Most mammals naturally consume milk only during infancy. Yet many human populations eventually develop the genetic ability to digest lactose into adulthood, particularly in societies practicing dairying over long periods. This adaptation does not occur immediately with domestication. Instead, it evolves later in certain populations through natural selection. The relationship between biology and culture becomes deeply intertwined. People begin milking animals. Some human populations gradually evolve greater ability to digest that milk. Culture creates a new environment in which biological evolution continues. Few moments illustrate the continuing evolution of our own species more clearly. The animals themselves reshape the land. Grazing patterns alter vegetation. Hooves compact certain soils while opening others. Manure enriches fields with nutrients, increasing agricultural productivity. Seeds cling to fur, spreading plants across wider regions. The partnership between humans and livestock becomes an ecological force extending far beyond villages themselves. Of course, these benefits come with costs. Living in close proximity to animals increases exposure to diseases capable of crossing between species. Scholars believe that many infectious illnesses affecting later civilizations ultimately trace their origins to long periods of intimate contact with domesticated livestock. The exact pathways differ from disease to disease, and the evidence remains incomplete for many ancient pathogens, but the broader pattern is widely supported. The crowded village now contains not only more people, but also more animals sharing the same environment. Health becomes increasingly complex. Even so, the advantages prove compelling enough that domesticated animals spread steadily across expanding farming societies. Trade routes begin carrying livestock into new regions. Communities exchange breeding animals along with seeds. Knowledge of herd management travels from village to village. Every successful partnership strengthens confidence that humans can shape nature rather than merely respond to it. Looking across an early Neolithic settlement at dusk, the changes seem almost gentle. Goats return from nearby hills in drifting groups. Sheep gather inside simple enclosures built from stone and timber. Dogs patrol the edges of the village as cooking fires begin sending smoke into the evening sky. Children help guide young animals while older generations inspect the day's harvest, stored safely within mud brick homes. Nothing about the scene suggests conquest, yet one of the most consequential alliances in Earth's history is quietly taking shape. Humans are no longer surviving only alongside other species. They are entering into relationships that will alter the evolution of animals, transform entire ecosystems, and provide the foundation upon which future civilizations, economies, and empires will ultimately rise. For generations, the promise of farming seems almost limitless. Seeds planted in the right season return many times their original number. Herds slowly expand with each successful birth. Villages become larger, their homes more substantial, and children grow up surrounded by familiar fields instead of endless journeys across changing landscapes. Looking only at these successes, it is easy to imagine agriculture as an unbroken story of progress. The archaeological record tells a more complicated story. The first farmers do not simply gain control over nature. In many ways, they exchange one set of uncertainties for another. The freedom to move wherever food can be found gradually gives way to dependence upon a relatively small number of crops and animals. Once a community invests years clearing fields, building storage facilities, and establishing permanent homes, abandoning everything becomes an increasingly costly decision. The harvest now determines almost everything. A successful growing season fills granaries, supports expanding families, and provides seed for the following year. A poor harvest creates immediate hardship. Two poor harvests in succession threaten the survival of an entire settlement. Hunter-gatherers rarely rely so heavily upon a single source of food. If one resource becomes scarce, they often shift their attention elsewhere. They may hunt different animals, gather alternative plants, fish along rivers, or move into neighboring territories where conditions are more favorable. Their flexibility serves as one of their greatest strengths. Farmers possess different strengths but also different vulnerabilities. Fields cannot be carried away. Orchards require years to mature. Livestock must be fed even when crops fail. The village itself becomes an investment that anchors people to the landscape, whether that landscape remains generous or not. Ancient weather patterns remind everyone that nature never truly surrenders control. One unusually dry spring can delay germination. Heavy rains may flatten ripening grain. Swarms of insects consume carefully cultivated fields with astonishing speed. Frost arriving only a few days too early can destroy months of labor. Unlike modern agriculture, there are no irrigation pumps, synthetic fertilizers, weather forecasts, or stored fuel reserves to soften these blows. Every harvest remains a negotiation with the environment. Evidence from pollen preserved in lake sediments and ancient soils suggests that climates during the early Holocene are generally favorable in many farming regions. Yet favorable does not mean stable. Rainfall fluctuates from year to year. Rivers alter their channels. Local droughts interrupt otherwise productive landscapes. Communities survive not because nature becomes predictable, but because they learn to prepare for unpredictability. Storage grows increasingly sophisticated for exactly this reason. Large communal granaries begin appearing in some settlements. Carefully constructed bins protect grain from moisture rodents, birds, and insects. Clay plaster seals cracks. Elevated floors improve air circulation. Families save more seed than they immediately require because experience teaches that abundance never lasts forever. Every full granary represents delayed gratification. Grain that could feed hungry mouths today must often remain untouched so that fields can be planted next season. This simple decision reflects a profound shift in human thinking. Agriculture requires planning across months and years rather than days and weeks. Parents begin making choices whose rewards may not arrive until their children are older. Entire communities invest labor in irrigation channels, terraces, and buildings that future generations will inherit. Time itself begins stretching further into the future. Yet these long-term investments also create new social tensions. If one family consistently produces larger harvest than another, questions naturally arise. Do they possess better land, better tools, more workers, greater skill, better luck? The archaeological evidence rarely answers these questions directly, but subtle differences begin appearing within settlements. Some houses become larger. Certain burials contain more ornaments than others. Access to valuable imported materials varies between households. These differences remain modest compared with later civilizations, yet they hint at changing patterns of wealth and influence. Stored food has a remarkable property. Unlike hunted animals that must often be consumed quickly, grain can accumulate. Accumulated food becomes accumulated security. Accumulated security gradually becomes accumulated power. No written records describe these earliest inequalities, but the physical remains suggest that perfect equality becomes increasingly difficult to maintain as agriculture expands. Labor also becomes more specialized within families. Children contribute to farming from an early age by chasing birds away from ripening crops, collecting fuel, carrying water, or helping care for young animals. Older adults continue performing valuable work through food preparation, weaving repairing tools, and preserving knowledge accumulated across decades. Life becomes organized around recurring agricultural tasks. Spring demands planting. Summer requires tending fields. Autumn brings exhausting weeks of harvest. Winter shifts attention toward repairing homes, crafting tools, processing stored food, and preparing for another cycle. The calendar becomes inseparable from the land. Human health reflects both the advantages and disadvantages of this new rhythm. Food supplies become more reliable during successful years, allowing larger populations to survive. Yet diets often become less varied than those enjoyed by many hunter-gatherers. Communities relying heavily upon wheat or barley consume enormous quantities of grain every day. While these crops provide valuable calories, they cannot always supply the full range of nutrients available from more diverse wild diets. Archaeologists studying ancient skeletons repeatedly observe signs of nutritional stress in many early farming populations. Iron deficiency appears more frequently. Childhood growth sometimes slows. Bone chemistry reveals changing diets dominated by cultivated cereals. Dental evidence provides another unexpected clue. As agriculture spreads, cavities become increasingly common. Sticky carbohydrates remain on teeth far longer than many wild foods, feeding bacteria responsible for tooth decay. Ancient mouths begin preserving silent testimony to humanity's changing relationship with food. Grinding grain introduces another problem. Stone querns slowly wear down with constant use, releasing microscopic mineral particles into flour. Over years of eating bread made from this flour, tiny grains of stone gradually erode tooth enamel. Many early farmers develop heavily worn teeth even when they avoid cavities. The daily loaf carries hidden costs invisible to those preparing it. Women in particular often bear extraordinary physical demands. Ethnographic comparisons and skeletal evidence suggest that food processing alone consumes countless hours. Grain must be cleaned, ground, mixed, and cooked almost every day. Repetitive motions leave lasting marks on bones and joints. These observations must be interpreted carefully because archaeology cannot always reconstruct individual lives with certainty. Nevertheless, what survives in the record suggests that agricultural work is shared across households, but not always equally distributed. Despite these hardships, farming populations continue expanding. The explanation lies partly in simple arithmetic. Agricultural land generally supports far more people per square kilometre than hunting and gathering alone. Even if individual health occasionally declines, larger populations allow settlements to grow steadily over centuries. Growth, however, creates fresh challenges. More people require more fields. Additional fields require clearing forests. Expanded agriculture pushes wildlife farther from villages. Competition over fertile land gradually becomes more significant. The peaceful image of isolated farming communities begins giving way to a more interconnected and occasionally contested landscape. Scholars continue debating exactly how early organized conflict develops between farming villages. The evidence remains incomplete, and isolated discoveries rarely tell complete stories. Defensive walls, injuries found on skeletons, and abandoned settlements each provide pieces of a much larger puzzle. What seems increasingly clear is that food worth storing also becomes food worth protecting. Granaries attract attention. Livestock can be stolen. Fields represent months of labor. The first farmers unintentionally create resources that others may wish to control. Yet alongside every new risk comes remarkable resilience. Communities adapt continuously. They improve storage methods. They experiment with different crops. They share knowledge across neighboring settlements. They learn which seeds survive drought more successfully, and which animals thrive under changing conditions. Agriculture remains an ongoing process of adjustment rather than a completed invention. Standing at the edge of another harvest, villagers watch golden grain sway beneath the late summer sun. Every stalk represents hope carefully cultivated over many months. Every basket carried toward the granary reflects hours of patient labor. Success is never guaranteed, yet neither is failure inevitable. The first farmers are discovering that changing the earth forever also means allowing the earth to change them. Their muscles, diets, villages, beliefs about time, relationships with neighbors, and expectations for the future are all being reshaped by the simple act of planting seeds and waiting for them to grow. It is a bargain filled with promise, burden, uncertainty, and consequences that will echo through every civilization yet to come. The first farming villages remain scattered points across an immense landscape separated by rivers, mountains, forests, and open plains. From the perspective of those living within them, the world still feels vast and largely unknown. Most people spend their entire lives within a relatively small region, rarely travelling farther than neighbouring valleys or seasonal gathering grounds. Yet despite these limited horizons, something remarkable begins unfolding across continents. Agriculture is no longer confined to a handful of pioneering communities. Over thousands of years, it begins one of the greatest expansions in human history. This movement is neither rapid nor uniform. Modern maps often illustrate the spread of farming with broad arrows sweeping gracefully across Europe, Asia, and Africa. Such images compress thousands of years into a single moment, giving the illusion of steady progress. The archaeological record reveals something much more complex. Farming advances in fits and starts. Some regions embrace it quickly, others resist for centuries. In many places, hunter-gatherers and farmers live side by side for generations, exchanging goods, ideas, and sometimes families without immediately sharing the same way of life. Exactly how this transformation unfolds remains one of archaeology's most fascinating debates. One explanation emphasizes migration. According to this view, farming populations gradually expand into new territories, bringing domesticated crops, livestock, and agricultural knowledge with them. As their numbers increase, they establish new settlements, carrying their traditions farther from the Fertile Crescent. A second explanation focuses on cultural transmission. Here, local hunter-gatherer communities observe neighboring farmers, recognize the advantages of cultivation, and adopt new techniques while remaining largely descended from the people already living there. Today, ancient DNA has dramatically improved our understanding of this question. Genetic evidence suggests that both processes occur, though their importance varies from region to region. In parts of southeastern Europe, early farming communities share strong genetic connections with populations originating in Anatolia, indicating significant migration. Elsewhere, local hunter-gatherers contribute substantially to later populations, demonstrating long periods of interaction and cultural exchange. No single explanation fully accounts for the extraordinary diversity of human history. The Danube River becomes one of the great pathways carrying agriculture into Europe. Flowing across thousands of kilometers, it links fertile valleys and open plains that prove well suited for early farming. Communities establish settlements along its banks, gradually extending cultivated landscapes farther west and north. Each new environment presents unfamiliar challenges. The climate of Central Europe differs noticeably from that of Southwest Asia. Winters grow colder. Rainfall follows different seasonal patterns. Forests cover enormous stretches of land where open grasslands once dominated the Near East. Farmers cannot simply repeat the methods that succeeded farther south. They adapt. Trees must be cleared before fields can be planted. Different soils require different approaches. Crops mature according to unfamiliar seasonal rhythms. Livestock encounter new diseases, predators, and grazing conditions. Generation after generation, agricultural knowledge evolves alongside changing environments. The forests themselves begin to retreat. Polished stone axes, far more durable than earlier tools, become essential for clearing woodland. Archaeologists frequently recover these carefully crafted implements from early farming sites across Europe. Their smooth surfaces and sharpened edges represent remarkable technological advances, allowing communities to transform landscapes previously dominated by dense trees. Yet forest clearance remains laborious beyond modern imagination. Without metal tools, every tree requires immense physical effort. Families cooperate over weeks or months to prepare relatively small fields. Fire often assists the process with controlled burning, removing undergrowth, before axes tackle larger trunks. The result is a mosaic landscape. Rather than endless forest or continuous farmland, early agricultural regions consist of cultivated clearings surrounded by woodland. Wildlife continues thriving nearby. Hunting remains important even among experienced farmers. This mixed economy proves surprisingly resilient. Further west, the expansion slows considerably. The Atlantic coastline presents unfamiliar conditions. Heavy rainfall, dense forests, and cooler temperatures challenge crops first domesticated in warmer climates. Some coastal hunter-gatherer societies possess abundant marine resources, including fish, shellfish, seals, and seabirds. For these communities, farming offers fewer immediate advantages. Why abandon a reliable way of life if the sea already provides plentiful food? Archaeological evidence suggests that in several regions, hunting, fishing, gathering, and farming coexist for centuries. People adopt certain domesticated animals while continuing traditional food gathering. Others cultivate crops only seasonally. Cultural boundaries remain fluid rather than sharply defined. Across the Mediterranean, another story unfolds. Seafaring farmers carry agriculture from island to island, introducing domesticated plants and animals into landscapes never before touched by cultivation. Small boats crossing surprisingly long distances transport seeds, livestock, and entire families between shores. These voyages demonstrate impressive maritime skill. Transporting living animals across open water requires careful planning. Freshwater, food, shelter, and calm weather all become essential. Every successful crossing extends agriculture into another isolated environment, where entirely new adaptations begin. North Africa experiences its own distinctive agricultural history. The Mediterranean coast receives crops and livestock connected to Southwest Asian traditions, while local environments shape unique combinations of farming and pastoralism. Farther south, the vast Sahara does not yet resemble the immense desert familiar today. During parts of the early Holocene, large areas of the Sahara support grasslands, lakes, rivers, and abundant wildlife. Archaeological discoveries reveal communities living beside waters that have long since vanished beneath shifting sands. Some practice herding long before the desert reaches its modern extent. Rock art preserved on isolated cliffs portrays cattle grazing across landscapes now almost unimaginably dry. These images stand as powerful reminders that climates continue changing long after agriculture begins. The spread of farming is therefore never separate from the changing Earth itself. Communities constantly adapt to environments that refuse to remain static. As agriculture advances across wider territories, new crops occasionally prove more successful than old ones. Farmers experiment with local wild plants. Some fail completely. Others gradually become valuable additions to existing agricultural systems. Innovation never stops. Every generation inherits knowledge but also modifies it. One valley develops better storage techniques. Another improves methods of clearing woodland. A neighboring community discovers that certain planting times produce consistently higher yields. These practical insights travel surprisingly far through networks of marriage, seasonal gatherings, exchange and migration. Trade expands alongside farming. Obsidian continues moving across astonishing distances. Decorative shells from distant coastlines appear hundreds of kilometers inland. Amber flint pigments and carefully crafted stone tools circulate among communities that may never share a common language yet recognize the value of one another's goods. These exchanges also carry stories. Travelers describe unfamiliar animals. They explain unusual farming methods. They compare harvest, weather, and distant landscapes. Long before written records exist, information spreads through memory and conversation, connecting communities across enormous regions. The archaeological record occasionally preserves striking evidence of these connections. A polished stone axe made from rock quarried hundreds of kilometers away, a shell ornament originating from a distant sea, a style of pottery appearing almost simultaneously across wide geographic areas. Each object quietly testifies to a world becoming increasingly interconnected. The spread of farming does not erase older traditions overnight. Many hunter-gatherer societies continue thriving for thousands of years alongside agricultural neighbors. Some actively choose not to farm because their existing economies remain highly successful. Others selectively adopt domesticated animals or crops without abandoning their broader cultural identity. History rarely moves in straight lines. Instead, it unfolds through countless local decisions shaped by geography, climate, opportunity, and tradition. Looking across Eurasia several thousand years after the first cultivated fields appear in the Fertile Crescent, the transformation remains incomplete but unmistakable. Villages dot river valleys once occupied only seasonally. Cleared fields interrupt forests stretching toward distant mountains. Herds graze beneath open skies where wild ancestors once roamed freely. New generations grow up assuming that sowing seeds, tending animals, and returning home after each day's labor are simply ordinary parts of life. Few pause to imagine that only a relatively short time earlier, almost every human being on Earth lived differently. The first farmers have not merely changed their own communities. Their descendants, their neighbors, and even the people who choose different paths are all becoming participants in a vast human expansion whose consequences will eventually reach nearly every inhabitable corner of the planet. By the time agriculture has taken root across much of Southwest Asia and begins spreading through Europe and parts of Africa, it is tempting to imagine that the story follows a single path outward from one remarkable birthplace. For much of the 20th century, that idea dominates popular understanding. The Fertile Crescent appears to stand alone as the cradle of farming, the source from which every cultivated landscape ultimately descends. The evidence uncovered over the past several decades paints a far richer picture. Humanity does not invent agriculture only once. Instead, different communities separated by thousands of kilometers, often with no contact whatsoever, begin arriving at remarkably similar solutions to the same fundamental challenge. They observe the natural world with extraordinary patience. They learn which plants respond well to careful management. They slowly reshape local species through generations of selection. Although each region follows its own timeline together, they reveal something profound about human ingenuity. Perhaps nowhere is this more striking than in East Asia. Along the valleys of the Yellow River in northern China, farming develops around a crop very different from wheat or barley. Here, the dominant grain is millet, a small-seeded plant exceptionally well suited to relatively dry conditions. Millet grows quickly, tolerates periods of limited rainfall, and produces dependable harvests across landscapes where Southwest Asian cereals often struggle. Communities gradually shift from gathering wild grasses to cultivating millet with increasing skill. The archaeological sites of Chishan and Peiligang preserve evidence of this transition. Storage pits filled with millet-polished stone tools, grinding equipment, and permanent houses reveal societies steadily building agricultural lives that owe little to developments occurring thousands of kilometers to the west. The crops are different. The climate is different. The cultural traditions are different. Yet the underlying process is remarkably familiar. Families observe useful plants. They encourage desirable traits. They settle more permanently. They invest in future harvests. A second agricultural tradition emerges farther south along the Yangtze River. Here the environment could hardly be more different. Warm temperatures, abundant rainfall, and broad wetlands create ideal conditions for rice. Unlike wheat or millet, rice thrives in flooded environments that would destroy many other crops. Wild rice has existed naturally across parts of Asia for immense spans of time. Early communities gather its grains long before deliberate cultivation begins. Over centuries, people gradually manipulate water levels, clear competing vegetation, and encourage the growth of preferred plants. Eventually, carefully managed rice fields become defining features of entire landscapes. Domesticated rice transforms not only diets but also engineering. Water management grows increasingly sophisticated. Simple channels direct seasonal floods. Earthen embankments retain shallow pools. Communities coordinate labor because maintaining irrigation systems requires collective effort, extending beyond individual households. Rice agriculture encourages forms of cooperation quite different from those developing in the dry farming systems of Southwest Asia. Yet the destination remains surprisingly similar: permanent villages, growing populations, increasing specialization, expanding social complexity. Independent paths converge toward comparable outcomes. Far to the southeast, another remarkable story unfolds on the island of New Guinea. Highland communities begin cultivating root crops such as taro and yam under entirely different ecological conditions. Dense tropical forests cover steep mountain slopes. Rainfall is abundant. Wild cereals play little role in daily life. Instead, farmers adapt to an environment dominated by lush vegetation. Archaeological investigations at Kook Swamp reveal ancient drainage systems dating back thousands of years. Channels carefully redirect excess water, allowing cultivation in otherwise waterlogged ground. These earthworks demonstrate impressive environmental knowledge developed independently of agricultural traditions elsewhere. Again, no outside teacher introduces farming. Local people respond creatively to local landscapes. Across the Pacific, another independent agricultural tradition eventually emerges in the Americas. Its origins unfold over thousands of years, beginning with one of the most extraordinary transformations ever achieved by human selection. The plant at the center of this story barely resembles modern corn. Its wild ancestor, known as teosinte, produces only a handful of hard kernels enclosed within tough protective casings. To an untrained observer, teosinte hardly appears related to the large ears of maize familiar today. Yet genetic research leaves little doubt. Modern maize descends from this modest grass through thousands of years of careful selection, carried out by indigenous farmers in what is now southern Mexico. Generation after generation, people choose plants with slightly larger kernels, stronger stalks, or more desirable growing characteristics. The cumulative effect proves astonishing. Perhaps no domesticated plant undergoes a more dramatic physical transformation. Without human care, modern maize struggles to survive in the wild. Without maize, countless American civilizations would never emerge in the forms history remembers. Beans and squash soon become equally important companions. Together with maize, they create what later generations often call the Three Sisters crops that complement one another both nutritionally and agriculturally. Beans enrich soil with nitrogen. Squash spreads across the ground, helping suppress weeds and retain moisture. Maize provides vertical support for climbing bean vines. This elegant agricultural partnership reflects deep ecological understanding accumulated over centuries. Farther south in the Andes mountain communities develop still another agricultural tradition. Potatoes become one of humanity's greatest food resources. Hundreds of varieties evolve under careful cultivation, each adapted to particular elevations, temperatures, and soils. The rugged Andean landscape presents extraordinary challenges. Steep slopes, unpredictable weather, and thin mountain air demand constant adaptation. In response, farmers construct terraces that transform mountainsides into productive fields. Stone retaining walls reduce erosion. Carefully managed irrigation distributes precious water. Entire hills become examples of human engineering working with rather than against natural terrain. Llamas and alpacas join these farming systems, providing transport, wool, fertilizer, and meat. Like other regions, agriculture here reshapes relationships between humans, animals, and landscapes in distinctive ways. Even Africa contributes additional independent agricultural developments beyond influences arriving from the Fertile Crescent. In the Sahel and parts of West Africa, communities begin cultivating crops such as pearl millet, sorghum, and African rice under environmental conditions very different from those of Southwest Asia. These plants evolve specifically for African climates tolerating heat, seasonal drought, and soils that challenge many imported crops. The diversity of agricultural origins becomes impossible to ignore. There is no single blueprint for becoming farmers. Human societies repeatedly discover that careful observation, patience, and accumulated experience can transform wild landscapes into cultivated ones. Scholars continue refining the details of these independent origins. The archaeological evidence remains incomplete in many regions. New excavations regularly push dates earlier or reveal unexpected complexities. Ancient DNSA microscopic plant remains pollen analysis, and improved dating techniques continue reshaping long-held assumptions. Yet one conclusion grows stronger with every decade of research. Agriculture is not the achievement of one civilization alone. It is one of humanity's great shared inventions expressed in remarkably different ways across remarkably different worlds. Standing back to view the planet as a whole, the pattern becomes extraordinary. Along the Yellow River, farmers harvest millet beneath dry northern skies. In the Yangtze wetlands, rice paddies shimmer beneath warm rains. High in New Guinea, gardeners manage tropical swamps. Across Mesoamerica, maize slowly replaces its wild ancestor. In the Andes, terraces climb impossible mountains. Across Africa, hardy grains flourish beneath seasonal suns. None of these communities know that others are making similar discoveries far beyond their horizons. They are separated by oceans, deserts, jungles, and mountain ranges that few, if any, will ever cross. And yet, guided only by careful observation and generations of accumulated knowledge, they arrive at the same astonishing realization. The Earth can be persuaded to feed far more people than nature alone ever intended if humans are willing to devote their lives to shaping it. As farming spreads into more regions and takes root in different climates, the changes extend far beyond fields of grain or herds grazing on distant hillsides. The land itself begins to look different. Forests that have stood for thousands of years gradually retreat. Rivers follow new courses. Wetlands shrink in some places and expand in others. Hillsides once covered with wild vegetation become patterned with terraces, while open plains acquire boundaries that exist only because human hands repeatedly maintain them. Without realizing it, the first farmers become the earliest large-scale engineers of Earth's surface. The transformation begins quietly. A single family clearing enough trees for one small field leaves little lasting impression on a vast woodland. Even several neighbouring households working together alter only a tiny corner of the landscape. But agriculture rewards repetition. Each generation clears a little more land than the one before. Each successful harvest encourages another field, another pasture, another storage building, another home. Over centuries, these countless local decisions accumulate into continental change. One of the earliest tools responsible for this transformation is surprisingly simple: the polished stone axe. Unlike the rougher chip tools used by earlier hunter-gatherers, polished axes are stronger, more durable, and capable of withstanding repeated blows against hardwood trees. Producing one requires considerable skill. Large blocks of suitable stone must first be quarried. The rough shape is chipped into place before hours, sometimes days of grinding against abrasive surfaces gradually produce a smooth cutting edge. These tools are valuable possessions. Some are repaired repeatedly throughout their working lives. Others travel long distances through exchange networks, indicating that high-quality stone sources become important regional resources. Archaeologists have traced certain axes hundreds of kilometers from the quarries where they originate, demonstrating that early farming societies are already participating in surprisingly extensive systems of trade. Armed with these improved tools, farming communities begin reshaping forests. Tree by tree, clearing by clearing, sunlight reaches ground that has remained shaded for centuries. Shrubs quickly colonize disturbed soil. Grasses flourish where dense woodland once stood. Fields appear as islands surrounded by remaining forest, gradually expanding as populations grow. This process is neither reckless nor entirely destructive. Many early farmers understand their environments intimately. They recognize which trees provide valuable fruit nuts or construction timber. Certain species are deliberately preserved within cultivated landscapes. Others are coppiced, cut in ways that encourage fresh growth from living stumps, creating sustainable supplies of poles and firewood. What survives in the archaeological and environmental record suggests that early land management often combines exploitation with careful observation. Even so, the cumulative effect is unmistakable. Pollen preserved in lake sediments tells an extraordinary story. Every flowering plant releases microscopic grains of pollen into the air. Some settle into lakes and wetlands where layers of mud preserve them for thousands of years. By extracting long cores from these sediments, scientists reconstruct ancient vegetation with remarkable precision. The results reveal forests slowly giving way to open landscapes. Tree pollen declines. Grass pollen increases. Evidence of cultivated cereals becomes more common. Tiny charcoal fragments rise alongside these changes, indicating that controlled burning frequently accompanies forest clearance. These microscopic traces provide one of archaeology's most powerful forms of evidence. Long after wooden houses have rotted away and cultivated fields have disappeared beneath modern vegetation, ancient pollen quietly preserves the memory of changing landscapes. Fire becomes another essential agricultural tool. Today, wildfires often evoke images of catastrophe, yet carefully managed burning has long served human societies. Controlled fires remove undergrowth, recycle nutrients into soil, reduce certain pests, and create open spaces suitable for grazing or cultivation. Many indigenous societies around the world continue practicing sophisticated forms of landscape burning well into historical times. Early farmers likely use similar techniques wherever local conditions permit. The result is not simply fewer trees. Entire ecosystems begin changing. Certain plant species expand dramatically because they thrive in disturbed ground. Others retreat as their habitats disappear. Animals adapted to open grasslands become more common in some regions, while forest specialists decline. Humans are no longer merely participants within ecosystems. They are becoming one of the dominant forces shaping them. Water too begins falling under increasing human influence. At first, agriculture depends largely upon rainfall. But as settlements expand into drier environments, communities experiment with directing water toward fields. Simple irrigation channels appear in favorable river valleys. Small embankments slow seasonal floods. Drainage ditches remove excess water from low-lying ground. These early engineering projects remain modest compared with the immense canal systems of later civilizations. Yet they represent an important conceptual shift. Instead of waiting for nature to deliver water exactly where it is needed, people begin moving water themselves. This new relationship with rivers carries unexpected consequences. Fields receiving repeated irrigation sometimes become more fertile. Others gradually accumulate salts left behind as water evaporates, reducing agricultural productivity over generations. Later civilizations in Mesopotamia will struggle with this problem on a much larger scale, but its origins likely lie in these earliest experiments with managing water. The evidence reminds us that every solution introduces new challenges. Pastoralism contributes its own environmental changes. Large herds of sheep and goats graze repeatedly across familiar landscapes. Their feeding habits influence which plants survive and which disappear. Goats in particular browse shrubs and young trees, aggressively slowing forest regeneration in heavily used areas. Hooves compact certain soils while creating new pathways across hillsides. Manure enriches fields near settlements, increasing crop yields, while concentrating nutrients in ways uncommon under purely natural conditions. The boundary between human and natural systems grows increasingly blurred. Some of the most dramatic agricultural landscapes emerge in places where farming appears almost impossible. Across steep mountain regions, communities construct terraces by cutting level platforms into hillsides and supporting them with carefully built stone walls. Terracing serves several purposes simultaneously. It reduces soil erosion, it conserves moisture, it creates relatively flat-growing surfaces where none previously existed. It allows farming on slopes that would otherwise remain unsuitable. Although the most famous terrace systems belong to later civilizations, their underlying principles begin developing much earlier, as farmers respond creatively to difficult terrain. Soil itself becomes something to manage rather than simply occupy. Repeated cultivation gradually exhausts nutrients if fields receive no opportunity to recover. Early farmers likely observe declining harvests after continuous planting, even if they cannot explain the biological processes responsible. In response, many communities rotate cultivated areas, allowing abandoned fields to regenerate naturally while opening new ground elsewhere. Others rely increasingly upon animal manure to restore fertility. Still others combine both approaches. Agriculture evolves through constant experimentation rather than fixed rules. The landscape begins recording human decisions almost like a living archive. Ancient field boundaries survive beneath modern forests. Buried irrigation channels remain visible from aerial surveys. Microscopic chemical changes linger within soils cultivated thousands of years earlier. Modern archaeology increasingly uncovers these subtle signatures using technologies unimaginable even a few decades ago. Satellite imagery reveals hidden earthworks. LIDAR penetrates forest canopies to expose forgotten agricultural systems. Geochemical analysis detects long-vanished human activity preserved within the ground itself. The first farmers leave fingerprints not only in artifacts but across entire landscapes. Scholars continue debating exactly when humanity becomes a planetary environmental force. Some researchers argue that agriculture marks the true beginning of significant human influence upon Earth's ecosystems. Others believe large-scale environmental transformation accelerates much later with industrialization. The evidence remains complex and no single boundary satisfies every scientific discipline. Yet few dispute one essential reality. The first farmers initiate a relationship with nature unlike anything that has existed before. Instead of adapting primarily to existing environments, people increasingly redesign those environments to meet human needs. Standing atop a hillside overlooking one of these early farming valleys, the changes appear subtle enough to escape immediate notice. A patch of woodland has disappeared. New clearings catch the afternoon light. Thin trails connect scattered houses to cultivated fields. Small herds move slowly across nearby slopes while smoke rises from cooking fires below. No monument announces this transformation. No inscription celebrates it. And yet these quiet alterations mark the beginning of a process that will eventually reshape forests, rivers, coastlines, grasslands, and mountains across every inhabited continent. Long before engines, factories, or modern cities, humanity has already begun the slow, relentless work of changing the face of the earth itself. For thousands of years, the first farmers live in settlements that remain modest in size. Their villages may contain a few dozen homes, or in exceptional cases several hundred inhabitants. From a modern perspective, these communities still seem small enough that everyone likely knows one another by name, shares common routines, and participates in many of the same seasonal tasks. Yet hidden within these seemingly simple villages lies a force capable of transforming the scale of human society forever. That force is surplus. The importance of surplus is easy to underestimate because modern life is built upon it. Supermarkets remain stocked regardless of the season. Grain harvested hundreds or thousands of kilometers away arrives by truck, rail, or ship. Most people rarely think about storing enough food to survive until the next harvest. The first farming communities cannot afford such assumptions. Every basket of grain preserved beyond immediate consumption represents possibility. It may feed a family through winter. It may become seed for the following spring. It may support a traveller. It may sustain a craftsperson who spends less time producing food and more time creating tools. It may be exchanged for materials unavailable nearby. The simple fact that food can be stored changes nearly every aspect of society. In hunter-gatherer communities, specialization certainly exists. Some individuals become particularly skilled hunters. Others excel at making tools or recognizing medicinal plants. Yet almost everyone remains directly involved in obtaining food. Agriculture gradually changes that balance. Reliable harvests allow certain people to devote increasing portions of their lives to other work. One individual spends weeks shaping polished stone axes. Another becomes highly skilled at producing pottery capable of protecting grain from moisture. Someone else weaves increasingly sophisticated textiles from plant fibers or animal wool. Others become builders, traders, or ritual specialists. None of these occupations completely separates people from farming, but the trend is unmistakable. Food supports work beyond food production. Archaeological discoveries make this transformation visible. Pottery begins appearing in extraordinary variety across many farming societies. Early vessels remain simple, yet over time they become thinner, stronger, and more carefully decorated. Some are clearly designed for cooking, others for storage, still others for transporting liquids or valuable goods. Pottery itself becomes a revolutionary technology. Before ceramic containers become widespread, storing grain safely presents significant challenges. Woven baskets, leather bags, and wooden vessels each have limitations. Clay once shaped and fired provides durable protection against moisture and many pests. Food security improves. With improved storage comes greater confidence. With greater confidence comes larger harvests. Each innovation strengthens the next. The same pattern appears in architecture. Permanent villages gradually expand into increasingly organized settlements. Houses cluster along recognizable pathways. Shared open spaces emerge. Communal buildings appear in certain locations. Construction techniques improve through accumulated experience. Mud bricks become more standardized. Stone foundations support heavier walls. Roofs grow more durable. Every generation inherits practical knowledge from the last. Perhaps nowhere is this evolution more vividly preserved than at Çatalhöyük in central Anatolia. Occupied beginning around 9,000 years ago, this remarkable settlement challenges many assumptions about early urban life. At first glance, it hardly resembles a conventional town. The houses stand tightly packed together with almost no street separating them. People likely move across rooftops, entering homes through openings in the ceiling rather than doors at ground level. From above, the settlement resembles a dense honeycomb of interconnected structures. Inside these houses, archaeologists uncover rich evidence of daily life. Wall paintings, clay figurines, carefully constructed ovens, storage bins, sleeping platforms, burials beneath house floors. Each building functions simultaneously as home workplace storage facility and memorial to earlier generations. Scholars continue debating exactly how authority operates within communities such as Çatalhöyük. Unlike later cities, obvious palaces or royal tombs are absent. Wealth differences appear relatively modest compared with those found in later civilizations. Some researchers therefore suggest that these settlements maintain comparatively egalitarian social structures, despite their impressive size. Others argue that authority exists in forms less visible archaeologically. The evidence remains incomplete. What survives in the record suggests complexity without necessarily requiring kings. This distinction is important. Large organized communities can exist long before formal states emerge. Elsewhere across Southwest Asia, another remarkable development quietly unfolds. Trade networks continue expanding. Obsidian from volcanic regions travels astonishing distances because of its unmatched sharpness. Turquoise marine shells, rare stones, pigments, and finely crafted ornaments circulate between communities separated by hundreds of kilometers. Every exchanged object carries information. A beautifully made tool demonstrates unfamiliar techniques. An exotic ornament reveals distant landscapes. A traveler describes crops thriving under different conditions or introduces improved methods of storing grain. Ideas move alongside goods. Agriculture itself benefits enormously from these exchanges. Farmers compare seed varieties. They observe unfamiliar animals. They adopt useful innovations while adapting them to local environments. Knowledge spreads gradually without written records, carried entirely through memory conversation and repeated observation. Religion and symbolism also begin reflecting agricultural life more deeply. Although interpreting prehistoric belief systems remains extraordinarily difficult, recurring themes appear across many early farming settlements. Fertility, seasonal renewal, animals, ancestors, cycles of life and death. These motifs likely resonate because agriculture makes human survival intimately dependent upon recurring natural rhythms. A failed planting season threatens everyone. A successful harvest feels almost miraculous. The changing seasons become central not merely to survival, but to cultural identity. Monumental construction begins emerging in surprising places as well. Perhaps the most extraordinary example is Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey. Dating to around 11,000 years ago, this site contains massive carved stone pillars arranged in circular enclosures. Its significance continues generating vigorous scholarly discussion. Some researchers argue that large gatherings associated with ritual encourage greater social cooperation, indirectly supporting the development of agriculture. Others suggest the relationship operates differently with increasingly settled communities, making such construction projects possible. No single explanation fully accounts for every aspect of the site. Yet one conclusion seems unavoidable. Human societies possess the capacity for extraordinary cooperation long before cities and states appear. Hundreds of people working together can shape landscapes, move enormous stones, and create enduring ceremonial spaces without centralized governments, resembling those of later civilizations. Surplus makes such cooperation easier. Food stored in advance supports workers engaged in projects extending beyond immediate subsistence. Every successful harvest therefore expands what communities believe possible. Population continues increasing. Children survive in greater numbers. Villages become towns. Towns begin influencing surrounding countryside. Travel between neighbouring settlements grows more frequent. The social world becomes denser. Alongside these developments, memory itself changes. Permanent settlements preserve history differently from mobile societies. Buildings accumulate generations of repairs. Fields retain traces of earlier cultivation. Ancestors remain buried beneath familiar homes. Landscapes become layered with stories connected to specific places. People no longer remember only routes across the land. They remember histories rooted within it. Standing at the centre of one of these expanding settlements at sunrise, the sounds differ profoundly from those of earlier hunter-gatherer camps. Potters prepare clay before the heat of midday. Stoneworkers strike obsidian into razor-sharp blades. Children carry water from nearby springs. Women and men sort harvested grain inside storage rooms. Herds leave the settlement accompanied by shepherds who know every familiar hillside. Smoke rises simultaneously from dozens of hearths. The village hums with occupations that would scarcely have existed only a few thousand years earlier. Nothing here yet resembles Babylon, Memphis, or Uruk. No towering temples dominate the skyline. No kings issue commands from palaces, yet the essential foundations are already in place. Agricultural surplus has created communities large enough to support specialized work, long-distance exchange, shared memory, and increasingly ambitious cooperation. From these quiet beginnings, the first true civilizations are now only a few thousand years away. As villages grow larger and harvest become more dependable, food gradually changes from something that is simply consumed into something that can be counted, protected, exchanged, and eventually controlled. A basket of grain is no longer only a meal waiting to be cooked. It becomes wealth. A herd grazing beyond the village is no longer merely a collection of animals. It represents security, influence, and future prosperity. With this subtle shift, one of the oldest relationships in human history begins to change. Food starts creating power. For countless generations of hunter-gatherers, material wealth has practical limits. Most possessions must be carried from place to place. Owning more than can be transported quickly becomes a burden rather than an advantage. Permanent settlements alter this equation completely. A family can now store hundreds of kilograms of grain inside a secure building. They can accumulate livestock over many years. They can expand their homes, repair them, and pass them to future generations. Property begins acquiring a permanence that mobile societies rarely experience. Exactly how ownership functions in the earliest farming communities remains difficult to determine. Archaeology preserves walls, tools, and seeds more readily than social agreements. Scholars continue debating whether fields belong primarily to individual households, extended families, or entire communities. The evidence varies from place to place. Some settlements appear remarkably egalitarian, with houses of similar size and comparable access to resources. Others reveal growing differences: larger storage facilities, more elaborate buildings, greater quantities of imported goods. These variations suggest that wealth, however modest by later standards, is beginning to accumulate unevenly. Food lies at the center of this process. A successful harvest allows a family to save seed, survive poor seasons, exchange surplus with neighbors, and perhaps support relatives during difficult times. Repeated success gradually creates resilience. Repeated resilience creates influence. People naturally seek advice from households that consistently prosper. Experience becomes authority. Authority over generations may evolve into leadership. Leadership itself changes as settlements expand. Small mobile bands rarely require permanent leaders. Decisions often emerge through consensus experience or temporary authority based on particular situations. Larger farming communities face different challenges. Who organizes the repair of irrigation channels? Who coordinates communal harvests? Who settles disputes over fields or grazing land? Who decides how stored food should be distributed during years of scarcity? These questions become increasingly important as populations grow. Leadership no longer concerns only hunting skill or personal reputation. It becomes connected to administration. This transition likely unfolds gradually rather than through dramatic political revolutions. Respected elders, successful farmers, experienced builders, skilled organizers, religious specialists, any or all of these individuals may contribute to emerging systems of authority. The archaeological record offers hints rather than complete answers. One clue comes from storage itself. In certain settlements, unusually large communal storage buildings appear alongside smaller household facilities. Scholars continue debating their purpose. Some may simply serve practical needs during communal harvests. Others might indicate early systems of shared resource management. Still others could reflect emerging political authority. No single explanation fully accounts for every example, yet the existence of centralized storage introduces new possibilities. Who controls access? Who records contributions? Who decides when grain should be distributed? Long before written bureaucracy develops, these questions begin shaping human relationships. Trade further amplifies these changes. Surplus grain can be exchanged for obsidian fine-stone shells, pigments, timber, or other valuable materials unavailable locally. Communities occupying fertile river valleys suddenly possess goods desired by distant neighbors. Agriculture creates economies extending far beyond individual villages. Travel becomes increasingly purposeful. Merchants, although still far removed from later professional trading classes, begin carrying goods between settlements with growing regularity. Each journey strengthens regional connections. Ideas spread alongside material wealth. Improved pottery styles, more efficient harvesting tools, new construction techniques, different crop varieties. Every exchange enriches both sides. But exchange also introduces competition. Communities producing especially abundant harvests enjoy advantages unavailable to less fortunate neighbors. Some occupy naturally fertile floodplains. Others possess reliable springs or rich grazing land. Geography itself begins influencing prosperity more strongly than before. Land acquires strategic value. Not every valley is equally productive. Not every river floods predictably. Not every hillside supports healthy crops. As populations continue expanding, access to fertile landscapes becomes increasingly important. Scholars still debate exactly when organized conflict first emerges between agricultural societies. Evidence exists, but it is uneven. Some ancient skeletons display injuries consistent with interpersonal violence. Certain settlements construct defensive walls. Others appear abandoned following destructive events. Yet caution remains essential. A wall may protect against floods as easily as enemies. An injury may result from accident rather than warfare. Ancient evidence rarely speaks with complete clarity. Even so, one broad pattern appears increasingly plausible. Food worth storing becomes food worth defending. The economics of conflict begin changing. Hunter-gatherer groups often move away from danger if resources elsewhere remain available. Farmers cannot easily abandon fields cultivated for generations. Their houses, their granaries, their orchards, their livestock, their ancestors buried beneath household floors, everything ties them to place. The incentive to defend that place grows steadily stronger. Agriculture also transforms human relationships with time in another profound way. Inheritance begins acquiring greater importance. A cultivated field prepared through years of labor becomes valuable not only during one lifetime but across many. Parents naturally hope children will continue caring for land that has sustained the family. Knowledge passes alongside property. Techniques for managing particular soils, the best planting dates, reliable water sources, the location of hidden stone deposits useful for tool making. Generations inherit accumulated experience deeply rooted in specific landscapes. Family histories become increasingly connected to land ownership. These developments contribute to growing social complexity. Marriage patterns may shift as alliances between farming households acquire economic significance. Neighboring villages strengthen relationships through family connections. Livestock and agricultural knowledge accompany these unions. Communities become woven together through both kinship and exchange. Religion likely evolves alongside these transformations. Although prehistoric beliefs remain difficult to reconstruct with certainty, agricultural societies appear increasingly concerned with fertility, seasonal renewal, ancestral continuity, and the forces governing successful harvests. Ceremonies marking planting and harvest probably become central moments within community life. The changing seasons are no longer merely observed. They are anticipated with deep emotional investment. A failed harvest threatens everyone. A successful one validates countless months of patient labor. Over time, these recurring cycles help organize social calendars, communal gatherings, and shared identities. Children born into these villages know no other world. To them, planting seed in prepared fields feels entirely normal. Watching goats return each evening, repairing irrigation ditches, cleaning grain before storage. These activities define ordinary life. The memory of constant migration survives only in stories passed down by grandparents whose own ancestors once followed wild herds across open landscapes. History quietly changes what people consider natural. Looking across one of these expanding settlements during harvest season, the evidence of transformation appears everywhere. Workers carry woven baskets overflowing with grain toward communal storage buildings. Potters fire new vessels that will preserve food through winter. Builders repair houses expected to shelter generations yet unborn. Children learn tasks their parents learned from theirs. Livestock crowd nearby enclosures representing years of careful breeding and patient care. Above all, there is planning, not only for tomorrow, not only for the coming season, but for years ahead. The first farmers have become architects of the future in ways no previous human societies could easily imagine. Without intending it, they have created conditions where wealth can accumulate, authority can expand, cooperation can organize thousands of people, and increasingly complex societies can flourish. From the quiet counting of grain inside village storehouses will eventually emerge taxes, governments, written records, monumental architecture, organized religion, and states powerful enough to shape the destinies of millions. The road towards civilization remains long, but its direction is now unmistakable. For all the remarkable achievements of the first farming societies, one truth remains impossible to escape. Agriculture never frees humanity from nature. It simply creates a different kind of dependence. Every field planted in hope is also exposed to uncertainty. Every village built beside a river benefits from water that may one day disappear or arrive with destructive force. Every successful harvest rests upon countless environmental conditions that no farmer, no matter how experienced, can fully control. This fragile relationship becomes increasingly clear as communities spread across larger territories. A few years of favorable weather encourage optimism. Granaries fill, herds expand, children survive in greater numbers. New houses rise beside older ones, and fresh fields are cleared from surrounding forests. Then the climate changes. Sometimes the shift is almost imperceptible. Rain arrives a little later than usual. Spring temperatures remain unexpectedly cool. A familiar stream runs lower than anyone remembers. At first these seem like ordinary variations. Every farming community expects good years and bad years. Experienced families prepare accordingly. But occasionally the changes continue. One disappointing harvest is followed by another. Pastures dry more quickly. Wild plants that once supplemented cultivated food become scarcer. Livestock must travel farther to find grazing land. The comfortable margin created by agricultural surplus begins to disappear. Modern science has revealed that the early Holocene, although generally warmer than the Ice Age before, it is far from climatically stable. Ice cores, lake sediments, cave formations, tree rings, and ancient pollen all preserve evidence of repeated fluctuations in rainfall and temperature across many regions. These changes are rarely uniform. While one valley experiences drought, another may receive abundant rain. Floods devastate communities downstream while neighboring uplands remain comparatively unaffected. Nature operates on regional patterns rather than universal rules. This unevenness explains why archaeology often reveals dramatically different histories in places separated by only a few hundred kilometers. Some settlements flourish continuously for centuries. Others are abandoned and later reoccupied. Still others disappear entirely. The reasons vary. Climate plays an important role, but it is rarely the only factor. Human decisions matter just as much. Communities that diversify crops often prove more resilient than those relying heavily upon a single staple. Those maintaining healthy relationships with neighboring settlements gain access to exchange networks during difficult times. Villages preserving woodland alongside cultivated fields may retain greater ecological stability than those clearing every available tree. The archaeological record repeatedly reminds us that adaptation often determines survival. One of the greatest environmental challenges facing early farmers is drought. Unlike hunter-gatherers who may relocate toward better conditions, established agricultural communities are deeply rooted in place. Their homes cannot simply be carried elsewhere. Fields prepared over many years represent enormous investments of labor. Orchards require decades to mature. Irrigation channels demand constant maintenance. Abandoning everything becomes a decision of last resort. Instead, farmers search for solutions. They deepen wells, extend irrigation systems, experiment with more drought-resistant crops, reduce herd sizes when grazing becomes scarce, share remaining food with relatives. Sometimes these strategies succeed, sometimes they do not. Flooding presents the opposite problem. River valleys often provide exceptionally fertile soils because seasonal floods deposit fresh layers of nutrient-rich sediment. The same rivers that sustain agriculture can also destroy it. Unexpected floods wash away young crops. Storage buildings collapse beneath rushing water. Livestock drown. Carefully prepared irrigation channels disappear overnight. Communities respond by building embankments, raising structures above flood levels, and selecting settlement sites more carefully. Engineering gradually becomes another form of adaptation. Soil itself introduces additional challenges. Repeated cultivation without sufficient recovery slowly reduces fertility. Ancient farmers cannot analyze nitrogen levels or understand microbial ecology, yet they observe practical results. Harvest from certain fields decline, plants become weaker, yields diminish. Experience teaches them that land, like people, sometimes requires rest. Many communities rotate cultivation areas or allow fields to lie fallow for periods before planting again. Others increasingly rely on manure from domesticated animals to replenish exhausted soils. These practices emerge not from scientific theory, but from patient observation repeated across generations. The partnership between farming and herding becomes even more valuable under such circumstances. Livestock provide more than food. They recycle nutrients. They consume vegetation unsuitable for humans. They offer flexibility during years when crops fail. A mixed economy often proves far more resilient than dependence upon agriculture alone. Pests represent another persistent threat. Insects descend upon ripening grain. Rodents infiltrate storage facilities. Birds strip newly planted fields. Fungal diseases attack crops during unusually wet seasons. Without modern pesticides or refrigeration, protecting food requires constant vigilance. Communities develop ingenious solutions. Cats gradually become valued around settlements because they hunt rodents threatening stored grain. Raised storage bins reduce access for pests. Clay seals protect containers from moisture and insects. Smoke discourages certain infestations. Every successful innovation preserves precious food. Disease increasingly shapes human life as well. Permanent settlements concentrate people and animals in ways rarely seen among mobile hunter-gatherers. Waste accumulates more rapidly. Water sources become vulnerable to contamination. Pathogens spread more easily through dense populations. Scholars believe many infectious diseases later associated with civilization ultimately emerge within these new ecological relationships. The exact origins differ from disease to disease, and many details remain uncertain. Ancient pathogens rarely preserve themselves clearly enough for complete reconstruction, yet skeletal evidence reveals growing signs of infectious illness within numerous farming communities. Children appear especially vulnerable. Infant mortality remains high. Periods of nutritional stress weaken immune systems. Life expectancy, while difficult to estimate precisely, often reflects the constant balance between agricultural abundance and biological risk. Despite these hardships, populations continue growing. The simple productivity of farming outweighs many of its disadvantages. More food supports more births. Larger communities generate more innovation. Knowledge accumulates more rapidly. Each generation inherits improvements developed by the last. Climate challenges also encourage creativity. Communities facing unpredictable rainfall refine water management. Those living in mountainous terrain improve terracing. River valley farmers develop increasingly sophisticated irrigation. Pastoral groups perfect seasonal movements that balance grazing pressure across different landscapes. Environmental uncertainty becomes a powerful engine of technological development. Some archaeological sites preserve remarkable evidence of resilience. After periods of abandonment, new settlers return. Homes are rebuilt. Fields are replanted. Fresh generations adapt to altered conditions rather than simply surrendering to them. Human persistence becomes one of agriculture's defining characteristics. Scholars continue debating the relative importance of climate versus social organization in explaining ancient successes and failures. Did drought destroy settlements directly, or did existing social tensions make communities less capable of responding effectively? The evidence rarely permits simple answers. No single explanation fully accounts for every collapse or recovery. Instead, environmental and human factors continually interact. Nature presents challenges. Human societies determine how successfully those challenges are met. Standing beside a river at the end of another uncertain growing season, an early farmer watches dark clouds gathering above distant hills. Rain may bring salvation. Too much rain may bring disaster. No prayer tradition or accumulated experience can eliminate that uncertainty completely. Yet seeds are planted once again. Fields are tended. Granaries are repaired. Children learn the same careful routines practiced by parents and grandparents before them. Agriculture has become an act of faith not only in the land but in tomorrow itself. Generation after generation, these communities continue planting despite knowing that nature owes them nothing. That quiet determination, repeated across thousands of years and countless forgotten villages, becomes one of the enduring foundations of civilization. Humanity's greatest transformation has never been guaranteed. It has always depended upon resilience in the face of an earth that remains as powerful, unpredictable, and ultimately independent as it was before the very first seed ever entered the soil. By the time farming has become established across wide stretches of Eurasia, Africa and other parts of the world, no village exists entirely in isolation. Even communities separated by hundreds of kilometers begin participating in networks that stretch far beyond the horizon visible from their fields. These connections do not resemble the vast trade routes of later empires, yet they quietly lay the foundations for a world in which ideas, crops, animals, technologies and beliefs travel almost as steadily as people themselves. The earliest exchange networks grow from practical necessity. No landscape provides everything a community requires. A fertile valley may produce abundant grain but lack high-quality stone for tools. Mountain settlements possess excellent obsidian or flint, yet have little suitable farmland. Coastal communities gather shells prized far inland, while forest regions offer timber unavailable on open plains. Trade begins not as luxury but as cooperation. One settlement exchanges surplus grain for carefully shaped stone blades. Another offers animal hides in return for pottery. A third provides pigments or decorative stones gathered from distant hills. Each exchange strengthens relationships extending beyond immediate neighbors. Over generations, these repeated interactions create webs of familiarity connecting regions that have never shared a common government or language. Obsidian provides one of the clearest archaeological examples. Formed through volcanic activity, obsidian fractures into edges sharper than most modern surgical steel. Early farmers value it enormously for knives, sickles, and finely crafted cutting tools. Because every volcanic source possesses a distinctive chemical signature, modern scientists can identify precisely where individual obsidian artifacts originate. The results are astonishing. Blades recovered from settlements in central Anatolia often come from volcanic regions more than 200 kilometers away. Other examples travel even farther. Each piece records not merely movement of stone, but movement of people, information, and trust. No trader crosses such distances without relying upon communities willing to offer shelter, exchange goods, or provide knowledge of unfamiliar landscapes. The routes themselves become repositories of accumulated experience. Travelers learn where reliable springs emerge even during dry summers. They memorize dangerous mountain passes. They identify friendly villages and avoid regions where conflict appears more likely. Knowledge of geography gradually spreads alongside physical goods. Seeds also begin remarkable journeys. Although wheat and barley originate in Southwest Asia, they gradually reach environments their earliest cultivators could never have imagined. Communities experiment constantly. Some crop varieties thrive in cooler climates. Others perform better under heavier rainfall. Farmers naturally preserve seed from the healthiest plants each season, unintentionally selecting strains increasingly adapted to local conditions. The result is extraordinary agricultural diversity. A field of wheat growing in Central Europe several thousand years after domestication differs subtly from one cultivated in the Fertile Crescent. Generations of local adaptation shape both plants and people. Animals follow similar paths. Sheep, goats, cattle, and pigs spread steadily into new territories, where they encounter unfamiliar climates, diseases, predators, and vegetation. Not every breed succeeds equally well. Communities selectively favor animals better suited to local conditions. Gradually distinctive regional livestock emerge. These differences become valuable. A neighboring settlement may possess hardier goats capable of surviving harsh winters. Another may raise cattle particularly well adapted to marshy floodplains. Breeding animals become important trade goods in their own right. Technology travels just as effectively. One village develops more efficient pottery kilns. Another improves weaving techniques. Elsewhere, farmers discover superior methods of storing grain or constructing irrigation channels. Innovation rarely remains confined for long. Marriage between neighboring communities often carries practical knowledge alongside family relationships. Young people raised in one settlement introduce familiar techniques into another. Children grow up blending traditions inherited from both sides of their families. Culture spreads quietly through ordinary human lives. Language itself likely evolves within these expanding networks. Although prehistoric languages leave almost no direct evidence, increasing interaction between communities undoubtedly encourages borrowing of words associated with farming, livestock, tools, and trade. Shared vocabulary often follows shared experience. Religious ideas may also travel. Archaeologists occasionally discover striking similarities in symbolic objects separated by considerable distances. Figurines emphasizing fertility, decorated pottery featuring recurring motifs, burial customs displaying familiar patterns. Interpreting these similarities remains challenging. Independent invention always remains possible. Yet in many cases, exchange between communities offers a plausible explanation. Ideas prove surprisingly portable. Some of the most important innovations involve time itself. Agricultural societies become increasingly attentive to seasonal cycles. Knowing precisely when to plant or harvest can determine survival. Communities therefore observe the sky with growing care. The annual movement of the sun, the phases of the moon, the appearance of particular stars before dawn. These celestial patterns gradually become practical calendars guiding agricultural work. Long before formal astronomy develops, farmers become careful observers of the heavens. The sky serves as their oldest calendar. Certain ceremonial sites may even reflect this growing attention to celestial rhythms. Scholars continue debating the precise functions of many prehistoric monuments. Some align strikingly with solstices or equinoxes. Others appear connected to lunar cycles. The evidence varies considerably from site to site, and caution remains essential. Not every alignment necessarily reflects deliberate design. Nevertheless, what survives in the archaeological record suggests that agriculture strengthens humanity's awareness of recurring natural cycles extending from the earth beneath their feet to the stars above. Population growth further intensifies regional connections. Villages once separated by long stretches of wilderness gradually find themselves surrounded by neighbouring settlements. Paths become well established. River crossings acquire familiar stopping points. Seasonal gatherings grow larger. Communities exchange marriage partners, livestock, seed tools, stories and practical advice. Human landscapes become increasingly interconnected. Yet this growing complexity also introduces fresh challenges. Diseases travel more easily along expanding exchange routes. Conflicts occasionally spread beyond individual villages. Competition for valuable resources intensifies. Successful innovations quickly alter regional balances of prosperity. Connection brings opportunity and vulnerability in equal measure. Still, the advantages prove overwhelming. Knowledge accumulates faster than ever before. A useful invention made in one valley eventually reaches another. Communities no longer solve every problem independently. They increasingly build upon one another's experience. This cumulative learning becomes one of humanity's greatest strengths. Each generation inherits not only local wisdom, but fragments of discoveries made by distant strangers. Modern archaeology continues revealing the astonishing scale of these ancient interactions. Chemical analysis traces stone tools to their geological origins. Ancient DNA reconstructs population movements across continents. Isotopic studies identify where individuals spend their childhood before migrating elsewhere later in life. Microscopic residues preserved inside pottery reveal foods transported over long distances. Every new technique uncovers additional evidence that prehistoric societies are far more connected than earlier generations of researchers once believed. Standing at the edge of a bustling farming settlement during harvest season, a traveller arriving from distant lands may carry little more than a small pack of tools, unfamiliar seeds, unusual ornaments and stories gathered along countless paths. Yet the influence of such journeys extends far beyond the objects themselves. A new planting technique may increase harvest for generations. An unfamiliar crop may eventually reshape regional agriculture. A better storage method may help a village survive future drought. History often changes through quiet exchanges rather than dramatic conquests. The first farmers who once transformed only their own valleys are now participating in something far larger than themselves. Across continents, without any single civilization directing the process, humanity is weaving together the earliest threads of an interconnected world. One field, one journey, one exchanged seed, and one shared idea at a time. Thousands of years pass. The villages that first experimented with planting wild grain disappear beneath layers of soil. Their wooden roofs collapse, mud brick walls slowly dissolve back into the earth, and generations of footsteps vanish beneath fresh sediments carried by rivers and wind. Entire communities that once seemed permanent leave behind little visible trace. If someone were to walk across these landscapes centuries later, they might see nothing more than gentle mounds rising above surrounding fields, unaware that beneath their feet rests the memory of humanity's greatest transformation. For most of history, those memories remain hidden. The first farmers leave no written chronicles explaining why they chose one valley over another. No diaries describe the excitement of an unusually successful harvest. No maps identify the exact boundaries of their earliest fields. Their voices disappear long before writing emerges. Yet remarkably, the Earth remembers. Modern archaeology begins uncovering this forgotten world piece by piece. In the 19th century, many researchers still imagine that civilization appears suddenly almost fully formed in places such as ancient Mesopotamia or Egypt. The deeper origins of agriculture remain poorly understood because the evidence lies buried beneath thousands of years of later occupation. Excavation gradually changes that picture. Every carefully removed layer of soil reveals another chapter reaching farther into the past. Broken grinding stones, charred grains, animal bones, fragments of mud brick, discarded tools. What first appear to be ordinary objects become extraordinary clues when examined together. One burned seed can transform an entire interpretation of a settlement. Carbonized grains survive because ancient fires accidentally preserve them. Instead of decaying, they become tiny black fossils capable of lasting thousands of years. Radiocarbon dating establishes their age with remarkable precision, while microscopic examination identifies the species. From a handful of seeds, archaeologists reconstruct ancient diets, farming methods, and even changing climates. The smallest discoveries often tell the largest stories. Animal bones offer equally valuable evidence. At first glance, a collection of fragmented skeletons may seem little more than discarded refuse. Yet zooarchaeologists study every detail. Which species are present? How old are the animals at death? Were they male or female? Do their bones display signs of domestication? Tiny patterns invisible to casual observers gradually reveal entire systems of livestock management. For example, a predominance of young male goat skeletons alongside older females strongly suggests deliberate herd management rather than random hunting. Such demographic signatures become some of the earliest unmistakable indicators of animal domestication. Plants preserve themselves in unexpected ways as well. Ancient pollen no larger than grains of dust settles into lakes, peat bogs, and wetlands year after year. Protected beneath accumulating sediments, these microscopic particles survive for millennia. Palynologists, scientists specializing in fossil pollen, extract long cylindrical cores from these deposits. Each layer represents another season, another year, another century. By identifying changing pollen types through time, researchers reconstruct ancient vegetation with astonishing detail. A decline in tree pollen alongside increasing grass pollen may indicate forest clearance. The sudden appearance of cereal pollen suggests nearby cultivation. Charcoal fragments reveal episodes of burning associated with land management. Without a single written word, entire landscapes speak. Ancient DNA has revolutionized this field even further. Only a few decades ago, recovering genetic material from prehistoric skeletons seemed almost impossible. Today, laboratories routinely sequence DNA preserved within teeth and dense portions of bone. These discoveries have transformed understanding of early farming. Scientists now compare genomes from hunter-gatherers, early farmers, and later populations across Europe, Asia, and beyond. The results confirm patterns archaeologists had long debated. Agriculture spreads partly through migration. It also spreads through cultural exchange. Different regions experience different combinations of both. Human history proves more interconnected and more complex than earlier models ever suggested. Ancient plant DNA provides equally remarkable insights. Researchers compare genetic material preserved within archaeological seeds to that found in modern crops. These comparisons reveal precisely how domestication changes wheat, barley, rice, maize, and countless other plants. Traits once shaped unconsciously by early farmers become visible at the molecular level. Every generation of planting leaves subtle genetic fingerprints. Even ancient human teeth preserve unexpected information. Microscopic wear patterns indicate the kinds of foods people consume. Chemical isotopes locked inside enamel reveal childhood diets and geographical origins. Tiny particles trapped within hardened dental plaque preserve starch grains, plant fibers, and even fragments of smoke inhaled around ancient fires. A single tooth becomes an archive of daily life. Technology continues expanding archaeological possibilities. Ground-penetrating radar detects buried structures without excavation. Magnetometry identifies ancient hearths, ditches, and buildings hidden beneath modern fields. LIDAR, using laser pulses fired from aircraft, removes forests digitally from the landscape, exposing forgotten settlements invisible from the ground. Entire networks of ancient terraces, roads, and irrigation systems emerge beneath dense tropical vegetation. Landscapes once believed untouched by humans are revealed as carefully managed environments shaped over thousands of years. The Amazon provides one of the most dramatic examples. For generations, many scholars assume vast portions of the rainforest remain largely uninhabited before European arrival. Recent archaeological discoveries challenge that assumption. Large settlements, geometric earthworks, managed forests, complex agricultural systems. The evidence continues growing, although many details remain under investigation. What survives increasingly suggests that humans have influenced far more of Earth's surface than once believed. The first farmers are no longer seen as isolated pioneers. They become participants in a global story of environmental transformation. Yet archaeology also teaches humility. Every discovery raises new questions. Why do certain communities adopt farming while neighboring groups continue hunting and gathering for centuries? Why are some domestication processes rapid while others require millennia? Why do certain settlements flourish before suddenly disappearing? No single explanation fully accounts for these patterns. The evidence remains incomplete. Many ancient sites still lie undiscovered beneath modern cities, farmland deserts, or rising seas. Others have been destroyed by erosion, construction, or looting long before scientists could study them. History always contains silences. Responsible archaeology learns to respect those silences rather than filling them with unsupported certainty. Collaboration between scientific disciplines has become essential. Archaeologists work alongside climatologists, botanists, zoologists, geneticists, chemists, geologists, and computer scientists. Each field contributes a different perspective. Ancient climate records explain environmental pressures. Genetics reveals biological relationships. Geochemistry traces migration. Botany reconstructs agriculture. Together, they create increasingly detailed pictures of lives lived thousands of years ago. Standing today upon one of those quiet archaeological mounds, little seems extraordinary. Perhaps wheat still grows nearby. Perhaps shepherds guide flocks across surrounding hills. The landscape appears timeless. Yet beneath every step lie forgotten houses, discarded tools, cooking fires, buried ancestors, and the preserved remains of meals eaten 10,000 years earlier. The first farmers may never have imagined that people living in unimaginably distant futures would patiently sift through their abandoned villages, grain by grain, bone by bone, searching for clues about how the modern world truly began. Their names have vanished. Their voices remain silent. But the earth has become their archive, and with every excavation another forgotten page of humanity's oldest agricultural story slowly returns to the light. After more than a century of excavation, scientific analysis, and debate, one question continues to follow the story of the first farmers more persistently than almost any other. Was agriculture humanity's greatest achievement, or was it the beginning of problems that still shape the modern world? Few topics in ancient history have inspired more discussion, and few produce answers that are both convincing and incomplete at the same time. At first glance, the answer seems obvious. Without farming, there are no cities. Without cities, there are no written languages. Monumental architecture, mathematics, organized governments, or civilizations capable of preserving knowledge across generations. Every modern nation ultimately rests upon agricultural foundations established thousands of years ago. Yet archaeology repeatedly reminds us that progress rarely arrives without cost. The earliest farming communities often work harder than many hunter-gatherers. Their diets become narrower. Infectious diseases spread more easily through permanent settlements. Social inequality gradually increases. Conflict over productive land appears more common. These observations lead some researchers to question whether agriculture initially improves individual lives at all. One of the most influential voices in this discussion is the evolutionary biologist Jared Diamond, who famously describes the adoption of agriculture as the worst mistake in the history of the human race. His argument does not deny that farming eventually produces civilization. Instead, it emphasizes the immediate consequences visible in the archaeological record: reduced average height, higher rates of disease, nutritional deficiencies, greater dependence on unpredictable harvests, increasing social inequality. According to this interpretation, agriculture creates larger populations at the expense of healthier individual lives. Many scholars find portions of this argument persuasive. Others argue that the phrase itself oversimplifies an enormously complex process. Human history rarely divides neatly into success or failure. Hunter-gatherer societies are extraordinarily successful within their own environments. Many continue thriving for thousands of years after neighboring communities adopt farming. Some never embrace agriculture at all because their traditional economies remain highly productive. Likewise, farming communities display enormous diversity. Some suffer repeated hardship. Others flourish under favorable environmental conditions. Generalizations quickly become difficult. The archaeological record refuses simple conclusions. Consider health. Average height declines in numerous early farming populations, suggesting increased nutritional stress during childhood. Yet over longer periods, agricultural societies often improve food security through innovation. Crop diversity expands. Livestock management becomes more sophisticated. Trade allows shortages in one region to be offset by abundance in another. Health fluctuates rather than following a single downward or upward path. The same complexity appears in discussions of work. Agriculture undoubtedly demands enormous labor. Fields require planting, weeding, harvesting, and maintenance. Livestock need daily care. Storage buildings require constant repair. Hunter-gatherers often spend fewer hours obtaining food than early farmers. Yet farming also creates opportunities unavailable within highly mobile lifestyles. Permanent homes become possible. Long-term construction projects flourish. Craft specialization develops. Knowledge accumulates in stable communities where skills pass efficiently between generations. Work increases, but so do possibilities. Population growth presents another paradox. Agriculture supports dramatically larger numbers of people. This alone transforms human history. The global population remains relatively small throughout most of the Paleolithic. Following the spread of farming, it begins expanding steadily. Larger populations generate more innovation. More innovation supports still larger populations. The cycle reinforces itself. At the same time, dense populations encourage disease transmission competition and environmental pressure. Every advantage carries accompanying risks. Social inequality perhaps illustrates the debate most vividly. Among highly mobile hunter-gatherers, wealth remains difficult to accumulate because possessions must be transported frequently. Permanent settlements change that balance completely. Land, livestock, stored grain, buildings, tools. These resources can now pass between generations. Property becomes inheritance. Inheritance gradually influences opportunity. Some families prosper, others struggle. Differences widen over centuries. Archaeological evidence increasingly reveals this pattern. Certain houses become larger. Some graves contain richer collections of ornaments or imported goods. Monumental architecture eventually appears alongside simpler dwellings. Hierarchy grows slowly but unmistakably. Still, even here, caution remains essential. Not every farming community develops extreme inequality. Many preserve surprisingly balanced social structures for long periods. Local traditions matter. Environmental conditions matter. Historical accidents matter. No universal formula governs every settlement. Environmental impact creates yet another area of debate. The first farmers initiate widespread forest clearance, alter river systems, reshape soils, and transform ecosystems. Modern environmental historians often identify agriculture as the beginning of humanity's large-scale influence upon Earth's landscapes. Without those earliest cultivated fields, later cities and industrial societies would never exist. Some researchers therefore trace today's environmental challenges back to decisions made thousands of years ago. Others argue this perspective risks unfairly judging prehistoric communities through modern concerns. The first farmers possessed neither fossil fuels nor industrial machinery. Their environmental impacts, while significant within local landscapes, remain tiny compared with those of recent centuries. Scale matters. Intentions matter. Historical context matters. Agriculture also transforms human psychology in subtle ways. Planning becomes increasingly future-oriented. Families save seed for seasons not yet arrived. Communities construct buildings expected to last generations. Calendars organize work months in advance. Memory stretches forward as much as backward. This long-term thinking may represent one of farming's greatest cultural legacies. Modern civilization depends upon investing effort today for rewards that may not appear until years later. The roots of that habit extend deep into humanity's agricultural past. Some scholars describe agriculture not as an invention but as a relationship. Humans shape crops. Crops reshape humans. People domesticate animals. Animals alter human evolution through diet, labor, disease, and even genetics. Neither side remains unchanged. The relationship continues evolving to this day. Modern wheat bears little resemblance to its wild ancestors. Modern humans differ genetically from Paleolithic populations, partly because agricultural life creates new selective pressures. The partnership never truly ends. Perhaps the most revealing perspective comes from recognizing that agriculture is neither inevitable nor accidental. The first farmers do not foresee cities, empires, or global civilization. They simply solve immediate problems using knowledge available within their own landscapes. Each generation makes practical decisions. Plant these seeds, protect these animals, store this harvest, repair this field, teach these children. No individual intends to transform the earth forever. History emerges through accumulation. Millions of ordinary actions combine into extraordinary consequences. Standing once more in that ancient valley where wild wheat once sways beneath gentle spring winds, nothing appears especially revolutionary. A family gathers grain. Children carry baskets. Goats browse nearby hillsides. Smoke rises from familiar homes. Every scene feels peaceful, almost ordinary. Yet hidden within those ordinary moments lies every future civilization. Every library. Every kingdom. Every scientific discovery. Every work of art, every nation, every modern city. The debate over whether agriculture represents humanity's greatest triumph or greatest mistake may never be fully resolved because the answer contains elements of both. It brings abundance and inequality, security and vulnerability, innovation and conflict, opportunity and responsibility. Like nearly every profound turning point in history, it refuses to fit comfortably into simple categories. The evidence suggests something more subtle. Agriculture is neither paradise nor catastrophe. It is the beginning of a new relationship between humanity and the earth, one that continues shaping every generation, including our own. Looking across the modern world from space, the fingerprints of the first farmers are impossible to miss. Great river valleys appear as ribbons of cultivated green. Mountain slopes carry terraces built by countless generations. Vast plains produce oceans of wheat, rice, maize, and barley. Roads connect cities that would never have existed without reliable food supplies, while billions of people depend each day upon agricultural systems whose origins stretch back more than 10,000 years. The extraordinary truth is that every one of these landscapes can be traced however distantly to those first experiments with wild plants and carefully managed animals. The first farmers never imagined such a future. They cannot foresee ships crossing oceans loaded with grain from continents they do not know exist. They cannot imagine satellites monitoring harvests from orbit laboratories, altering the genetics of crops or machines, harvesting fields in hours that once demanded weeks of human labor. Yet the chain connecting their world to ours is unbroken. Every generation inherits fields from those who came before. Every generation changes them. Every generation passes them onward. That continuity is one of the longest stories humanity has ever told. Modern agriculture often appears completely separated from its prehistoric origins. Tractors have replaced digging sticks. Steel plows have replaced polished stone axes. Global markets have replaced local exchange between neighboring villages. Artificial irrigation systems, fertilizers, and scientific breeding have transformed productivity beyond anything early farmers could imagine. Despite these enormous technological changes, the underlying relationship remains remarkably familiar. People still wait for rain. They still watch the changing seasons. They still worry about drought, floods, disease, and uncertain harvests. Nature continues setting limits that technology can reduce but never eliminate entirely. Climate remains a powerful reminder of that reality. Today, scientists monitor shifting rainfall patterns, rising temperatures, and changing ecosystems with instruments of astonishing precision. Yet many of the challenges confronting modern agriculture echo those faced by the earliest farming communities. How should water be managed? How can soil remain fertile? Which crops are best suited to changing environmental conditions? How should societies respond when harvests fail? These questions have never truly disappeared. They have simply become global rather than local. The remarkable resilience of agriculture also continues. Throughout history, crops have crossed oceans, adapted to unfamiliar climates, and sustained civilizations far from their original homes. Wheat from Southwest Asia now grows across North America and Australia. Rice originating in Asia feeds populations throughout Africa and the Americas. Maize, first domesticated in Mesoamerica, has become one of the world's most widely cultivated crops. Potatoes from the Andes transformed European agriculture after their introduction. The exchange of crops has reshaped civilizations, repeatedly reminding us that agriculture has always been a story of adaptation. Genetics has revealed another astonishing legacy. Many traits carried by modern human populations reflect thousands of years spent living within agricultural societies. In some regions, adults retain the ability to digest milk because generations of dairying created evolutionary advantages for individuals capable of processing lactose. Genes associated with diet disease resistance and metabolism continue bearing subtle evidence of humanity's long partnership with farming. The first agricultural revolution never truly ended. It continues inside the human body. The landscapes surrounding us also preserve ancient decisions. Many forests once believed entirely natural contain tree species deliberately encouraged by generations of indigenous land management. River floodplains remain fertile because people have cultivated them continuously for millennia. Even abandoned agricultural terraces continue shaping erosion patterns centuries after their builders disappear. Earth remembers. Human activity has become woven into geological history itself. Archaeologists increasingly describe many modern landscapes not as untouched wilderness, but as places carrying deep histories of careful management, adaptation, and environmental change. This perspective transforms how we understand the past. The first farmers are no longer viewed simply as primitive villagers struggling towards civilization. They become environmental engineers, plant breeders, animal geneticists, though they never know the word, hydrologists guided by observation rather than mathematics, ecologists whose classrooms are rivers, forests, grasslands, and changing skies. Their knowledge is practical, accumulated patiently across generations. Without formal science, they nevertheless discover principles that modern research continues to confirm. Selection changes species. Healthy soils produce stronger crops. Water determines survival. Diversity often provides resilience. Observation matters. Patience matters even more. There is another legacy that receives less attention. Agriculture changes humanity's sense of responsibility. Hunter-gatherers respond primarily to opportunities already present in nature. Farmers create opportunities that do not yet exist. Seeds planted today represent faith in months still to come. Orchards planted by one generation may produce their finest harvest for grandchildren yet unborn. Irrigation canals require maintenance extending across lifetimes. The future becomes something people actively build. Perhaps this shift explains why agriculture ultimately supports civilizations capable of constructing monuments intended to last for centuries, preserving written records for unknown descendants, and imagining futures far beyond individual lives. The first farmers teach humanity to think across generations. Not every consequence has been positive. Agriculture contributes to deforestation, habitat loss, inequality, warfare over resources, and environmental pressures that continue challenging societies today. Its successes create problems that demand new solutions. Every great transformation carries unintended consequences. Yet without agriculture, the modern world would be almost impossible to recognize. There would be no great cities rising beside rivers, no universities preserving accumulated knowledge, no libraries, no observatories, no global civilizations connected through trade and communication. Even the science used to reconstruct the origins of farming exists because farming first makes large, stable societies possible. The story, therefore, circles back to where it began. A quiet valley, wild grasses bending beneath the wind, families gathering seeds without realizing they stand at the threshold of a new age. History often celebrates conquerors, kings, inventors, and explorers whose names survive in written records. The first farmers possess no such recognition. Their names disappear long before history begins recording names at all. Yet their influence surpasses almost every ruler who follows. Empires rise and collapse. Languages appear and vanish. Religions spread across continents. Borders shift endlessly. Still, every meal eaten anywhere in the world carries a faint echo of these forgotten communities who first noticed that scattered seeds returned as harvests. Their greatest achievement is not simply growing food. It is changing the relationship between humanity and the earth forever. Every loaf of bread, every bowl of rice, every field stretching toward the horizon, and every city sustained by distant harvests stands as an enduring reminder that the modern human world begins not with walls, crowns, or armies, but with ordinary people patiently watching. Small green shoots emerge from the soil and believing they would return again next season. The story of the first farmers ends where every harvest eventually does in silence. The fields are gathered, the tools are set aside, and the evening light settles gently across valleys that have witnessed thousands of seasons. The people who first planted wild grain have long since disappeared. Their homes have become earth. Their footsteps have faded beneath newer paths. Their voices no longer echo across the hills. Yet something of them remains. It survives in the seeds carried from one generation to the next. It survives in rivers that still nourish fertile plains, in orchards that continue blooming each spring, and in landscapes shaped by patient hands so long ago that no memory can reach them directly. Civilizations often measure themselves by monuments of stone, by kings, by victories, and by written chronicles. But the deepest changes in history are frequently quieter than that. They begin with repeated acts so ordinary that no one notices history unfolding. A handful of seed pressed into damp soil, a child learning when the rains usually arrive, a family saving part of the harvest instead of eating everything today. Those simple choices continue to ripple across thousands of years. The world we know is built upon countless forgotten mornings like those. Perhaps that is the most enduring mystery of all. Humanity changes the earth forever, not through a single dramatic moment, but through patience, observation, and the willingness to believe that tomorrow's harvest is worth preparing for today. As daylight fades over those ancient fields, the wind still moves through grasses much as it did at the end of the last ice age. Birds cross the evening sky. Rivers continue their slow journey toward distant seas. The landscapes have changed beyond recognition, yet they remain connected to those first quiet experiments that altered the course of history. The first farmers are gone, but the world they began is still growing.